I, a 29-year-old male, was out partying this Friday night with 4 of my female friends, 2 of which I have just met that evening. We were having drinks at a club in Central Europe. The night was going great. We were dancing and talking. All of us had a lot of fun. At around 2 a.m., the girls grabbed a taxi and went home. I decided to stay a bit more in the club to finish my drink. I've danced on the stage for about 20 minutes. Then I grabbed a taxi and I went home too. When I arrived on the street where I live, my drunk butt realized that I have no keys, and so I couldn't get home as I live alone. So I called another taxi and I went back to the club to look for my keys. First, I went to the bar to ask if anybody has brought any lost keys to them that night. Unfortunately, they didn't have my keys, so I started to look for them in the club and every place that I was that night. I turned on the flashlight on my phone and have been looking for the keys in a mass of people. About 10 minutes go by, and I haven't found anything apart from some broken glass and cigarette butts. I went back to the place where I was initially looking for them. This is the place where we have been having our drinks with the girls before. I've started to look for my keys on the sitting benches instead of on the ground. I had my keys in the inside pocket of my jacket, as I always do, and my jacket was placed in the corner of that bench the whole night before I first left. People were sitting on the benches, and they'd had their jackets on the benches too. I sat down near the corner where I was sitting before, and beside me was a guy with lines of some drugs on his phone, freely giving them to other people. He had put his jacket in the corner of the bench, and I wanted to look at the corner of the bench to see if my keys hadn't been pushed into the corner or something. So I grabbed his jacket, and to my surprise, my keys were right under this guy's jacket, in the middle of the bench. I was drunk, and so I started pretty much yelling that I was so happy to have found them, as I'll admit that I was getting pretty desperate at that moment. Now, there was a guy on that bench that we'd met with the girls before in the club. I'll call him L. He was really nice during the whole night, and so I kept talking to L when I found my keys. I even went to the bar and grabbed another beer just to talk for a bit more with L. I went to the bathroom, and when I came back, L had found himself an acquaintance to which he was talking, so I just started to finish my beer while I smoked a cigarette and was getting ready to go home. This is when the guy that had lines of those drugs I mentioned earlier on his phone had started talking to me. His name was Pedro, and it was definitely a fake name that he gave me. I've been talking with him in English. Pedro was 19 years old and he was from Colombia. He told me stories about his life in Colombia and how his family struggles there. He told me that his father had died recently and he is the oldest son, so he is in Slovakia trying to make some money for the family. He even showed me photos of him and his family back in Colombia. I sympathized with Pedro, and I was honestly feeling a bit sorry for him. After about 20 minutes, L had scored with a girl that he met, and he said that they were going home. He asked Pedro if he had any MDMA on him, and he sold some to them, so L left with the girl. Now, people around on the bench had seen what was happening, and so they wanted some stuff from Pedro as well. He started to make lines on his phone again. I told Pedro that I was going home and I wished him best of luck, grabbed my jacket, and I started walking. This is when Pedro called out to me and stopped me, said that it was late and he should go back to the hotel too. He scratched the drugs from his phone onto the table, took his belongings, and told the people that they can finish whatever was left for free. Me and Pedro had walked out of the underground club at this point, and when we were outside, he asked me if I wanted to walk him to his hotel, which was nearby, just a 5-minute walk. He told me in the club that he really had no friends and no family in Slovakia as well. Again, I sympathized with him. I told him that, sure, I can walk him to the hotel. We were talking the whole walk, and he was saying some really nice things to me, like how I get his situation and how good of a person I am. When we arrived at the hotel, the door was closed and he messaged to someone to come and open the door for him. He asked if I wanted to have one last beer with him, to which I said sure, but I'll be on my way once we finish the beer. some girl came and opened the door for us. They had spoken in Spanish as they greeted me. The hotel itself didn't really look like a public hotel, I guess. There was a reception, and stairs up and on the left was a dining room. Pedro told me to wait for him in the dining room. This was like 5 in the morning already. I went to the dining room, and there was a girl sitting with her laptop there. I greeted her with hola and sat down. Pedro came after, maybe 3 to 5 minutes later, with 2 open cans of some beverages. There was a parrot and a Jack Daniels logo on this. The can was golden color, I think. But this was the moment that I should have gotten suspicious. And I never should have drunk from that can, that opened can. I was naive and drunk, and I overlooked this fact, and I drank from the can. I was talking with Pedro about all the drug cartels in Colombia and how their politics are all messed up. After about 10 minutes, I started to feel weird as well, and I looked at my phone. My hands and eyes were tingling. I was quickly aware of what was happening now. I quickly turned on the location and mobile data on my phone, and I put the phone in a different pocket than I did that night. Pedro started to ask me how I was feeling, to which my adrenaline levels blew up. Quite honestly, I started to think that I was about to be abducted by some Colombian human trafficking ring. My sight started to weirdly tingle, and the lights were blinding me at this point. My jaw was messed up as I was pushing my teeth together. I've taken drugs before in the past, and this felt a lot like a stimulant and a dissociative, which was really weird for me to understand. I tried to keep my voice calm and my mind present. I told Pedro that I knew what was going on, and I asked him why he gave me a stimulant if he needs me unconscious. Pedro's hands, they started to shake at this point, and he didn't answer me. The girl at the laptop looked right in my eyes, the first time that she'd even moved with her body. Pedro grabbed his phone and started to write to somebody on WhatsApp. I told Pedro that they'd made a mistake in the dose and that I'm fine apart from having been unknowingly drugged. Quite honestly, I think that Pedro had drugged me back in the club while I went to the toilet, which was why he quickly got up when I was leaving. Everything that I said, Pedro rewrote to somebody else, and he always waited for an incoming message before saying anything to me. I started to talk to the girl too, told her that I don't care about what they were doing there, but I was walking out. At one moment, I remember saying that I get what Pedro was doing, but I don't get what the girl's part was in all of this, to which I was pointing my finger at her. Pedro then got a notification on his phone, and he told me that he was sorry and I can go home if I want. I didn't respond to him, got my drugged butt out of there, and I was walking out of the dining room. I stopped by the girl with her laptop, stared right into her eyes, and I held my right hand up in a fist bump. She looked in my eyes, gave me a fist bump, and did a sort of weird grimace on her face. I walked to the door at the reception, which was now closed. I started to kick and punch the doors while yelling, "Open the door." The receptionist eventually did, and thankfully, I walked out. At this point, my heart was absolutely jumping. My whole body was shaking. I felt crazy dizzy and awake all at the same time. I ran to a main street and I was calling my mum to come and get me as fast as possible, but I didn't know where I was. I was feeling disassociated and couldn't really apprehend what had just happened. As I got to a main street where a bus stop was, I started to feel very paranoid all of a sudden. There was a white Mercedes SUV that had stopped right in the main road near the bus stop that I stood on. They turned off their car lights and were just sort of standing there. I told all of this to my mum, and she told me to look for a camera, so I stood right under a camera which was at the bus stop to make sure that I was seen. I was feeling and talking weirdly, to which my mum told me to talk to her, to tell her what I can see around me. I've seen a few people that walk to the main street. Everybody was on their phone and occasionally looking at me. One guy came close to the bus stop and I approached him while I still had my mum on the phone. I asked, "What does he want from me?" and he was like, "I'm sorry, do I know you?" To which I just said that I was sorry. After about 10 minutes of me being on the phone with my mum, the white SUV turned on the engine and they left. My mum, she came by car soon after, and I was walking to her car on the road, but at this point, I really couldn't walk properly. I felt paranoid, tons of adrenaline going through my body. My heart was pumping so fast that I thought that I was going to have some kind of a seizure or a heart attack or something. In the end, I managed to get to my mum's car though. She was in her pajamas and terrified. I started to tell her everything that had happened. I told her to drive around the city instead of driving me home just in case they were following us. We were driving around for maybe an hour, talked about what had happened during the night, how the inside of that building looked and all. My jaw was doing some crazy stuff that my mum could hear it, and she was really scared for me. The whole ride, I felt so weird. At one point, it honestly felt like my soul left my body. It's hard to describe it, but I just didn't feel like myself, like I wasn't real. Lights were blinding me, and my visions were blurring and tingling, and my eyes were going up and down all the time. I didn't feel any rush or euphoria or anything. And in the end, I just thought to myself that they must have given me some sort of a bad mix. I arrived at my home at around 7:30, in the morning that is. My mum stayed at home with me, comforting me the whole time. I tried to sleep, but I just couldn't. We were talking about going to the police and also about if I'm in any kind of danger anymore. And at around 11 in the morning, finally I fell asleep. During this time, my mother cleaned my apartment and my sister came to visit me. Honestly, I don't know what I would do without my family. One of my girlfriends that was with me during that night came to visit me too. As I talked to her, I thought that I got some kind of an episode, like schizophrenic or something. Like, why the heck would I be a target of something like this? I mean, I'm a chubby, bearded guy. Why would they want to abduct me of all people? I'm afraid of going to the police, as our police department and politics are pretty corrupt, and they've always worked with some kind of mafia as long as I can remember. They would take my testimony, start to investigate, and then they would be stopped by their officials, no doubt. I still don't fully believe that what had happened to me was an experience with human trafficking. However, there are so many red flags of it that I can remember that I really can't count it out either. Like, why would Pedro be so scared after I called them out like that? Why would he have stopped talking to me unless someone sent him a message on his phone like that? Why would he even start to message somebody during a conversation? And obviously, why would he drug me without me knowing it? But ultimately, why on earth would he just let me go like that? Eventually, I went to the ER with my mum this early morning as I woke up with spasms all over my body. They gave me an IV and sent a sample of my blood for toxicology reports. They did some tests, EKG and blood pressure, and they've sent me home maybe 3 hours ago. The results of the toxicology, they just came by email to my mum. And, sure enough, there were traces of fentanyl, ethylphenidate, and ketamine all in my blood. Also, while I was being given the IV, the doctor said to my mum that apparently this was not uncommon and that they've had a lot of patients who have been unknowingly drugged during the last few years. He said that it wasn't this common before and that lately there's been a lot more of it. I still don't know why I was drugged like this, but really there's only a few options. 1, it was a kidnapping attempt. 2, I've heard of stories of organ harvesting as well. Or 3, maybe it was some sort of perverted or sexual thing. Whatever the case may be, I am just grateful that I got out of there. So, to start this off, I want to say that I've never seen anything like this in my life. At the time, I was 15 years old, pet sitting a friend of mine's dogs while they were out of town, and in Benson, Arizona is where this took place. This property, it had a lot of acres, and it took about 15 minutes to get to their little house right in the middle of probably about 75 acres. At the time, it was about, I want to say 10 p.m. My friend had 8 dogs, and they usually stayed outside for the most part because they were big watchdogs who seemed to have been able to defend themselves in the past. Before everything happened, I was inside their tiny home making food, and then I heard the biggest dog start squealing kind of quietly, very scared and seemed to be in pain, but loud enough for me to hear. I knew the sounds were unusual that this dog was making, so I shut up and ran outside to see what was going on. I thought maybe the dog might have hurt himself or something similar. Maybe they'd gotten into a fight or something. But this just was not the case. And when I got out there, I ended up seeing a 5 to 6 foot tall, pale, very skinny creature hunched over this dog, sucking on its head. I was stunned, almost too stunned to speak, but I managed to shake that feeling off. I start yelling at this thing because the dog started yelping loud, and I'm telling this creature to get out of here and trying to scare it off. I ran over to her dog as fast as I could because I've heard of these things before, maybe a chupacabra, and I know that they would likely eat the dog if I didn't do anything. But I stop about 10 feet in front of it to see this creature jump up and run as fast as it can away on 2 legs. After that, I couldn't help but keep looking over my shoulder the rest of the time that I was there. I also didn't let these dogs out that night, and I didn't care to go out there either. So when my friends come back, I told them everything that happened and what I saw. It felt like everyone was just as frightened as I was, and that made me even more unsettled. I ended up leaving that desert, and I did not look back. I still don't know what to make of it to this day, except that I want to say that it was something demonic. This was maybe 6 to 7 years ago. I have photos on my camera as well still, but I haven't changed it in ages. Gave up on photography, you know how it is. So I hope that you guys can just trust me. So we've been going on these trips as a family for a really long time now, probably 17 years if I had to guess. I won't say where it is that we go, but it's in the Australian bush, just to give you all an idea of the setting. Anyway, we've had a few creepy experiences there, but nothing inexplicable, I guess. But this event, it still weirds me out, and I cannot really think of anything that explains it. So, the year of this, my sister, cousin, dad, and myself all drove up together and were the first to arrive at the house. We had to wait for my grandma to arrive with the key, so my dad sat on the deck with a beer, and my sister, cousin, and I went on a little journey. The 3 of us made our way to a little creek not far from the house that we nicknamed Bride to Terabithia because of the tree that had fallen and acted as a bridge for use to get across the creek. This creek, it never had water in it though, and was not deep or wide. We could easily walk through it is what I'm getting at, but the tree was fun. Anyways, my cousin makes an off-the-cuff sort of comment as we walk across the tree, asking, sort of sarcastically, "Is there something dead around here?" because of how many flies there were. Lo and behold, we get to the other side and there was something dead. We were greeted with a dead kangaroo. Nothing too jarring. I mean, I'd seen plenty on the side of the road. But this one was cut clean in half. And when I say clean, I mean clean. Like, it was perfectly halved, surgically. Also, there wasn't even an ounce of blood on the fur, no blood on the ground, and the top half was just nowhere to be found. I happened to have my camera on me, and I took some photos of it, then my cousin poked it with a stick, and literally hundreds of flies came out of it. My cousin and sister kept poking at it, trying to move it into the creek, but a fully grown kangaroo, even half of one, isn't exactly light. Their sticks, they eventually broke, so I grabbed it by the tail and pulled it into the creek so that we could bury it, but really we just covered it with sticks and flowers. We looked up top everywhere for the second half or a trace of what might have happened to it, but we just couldn't find anything. We ended up going back down into the creek and walking through it, looking for something, and what we found only made the whole situation even more confusing. We found, if I remember correctly, 4 dead rabbits, but only their bottom halves, all lined up neatly along the floor of the creek until it reached thick brush that we couldn't walk through any longer. But it was the same thing with these rabbits though. No top halves to be found, no blood anywhere, cut clean in half, like surgically. It got too weird at this point, so at that, we just left. We never went back there the entire trip that we were there that time. Although, we've been back to this place every year since then, and we have never seen anything like this again. My first encounter was when I was super young. We were currently living in an apartment in Orlando, Florida. I was maybe 3 or 4, and I just remember looking into one of those large, bulky TVs and seeing rows of what looked like dead people in this TV, which was turned off, mind you. In that same house, as odd as it sounds, I was laying down in my parents' bed and remember seeing an evil-looking shadow of what looked like Crash Bandicoot. My next encounter, I think I was 5 or 6, in Miami, Florida, at my stepdad's house. My family and his always said that that house was haunted, and I guess they must have been right. They'd mentioned hearing dishes being moved and things like that, but no one ever saw that face that I did. No one but me. The first time that I saw it, it was only a shadow figure. The way the room was set up, next to the doorframe was a mirror, and across from that mirror was my bunk bed. All of a sudden, the bed started shaking, as if a grown man was trying to destroy it. I happened to look in that mirror, and on that top bunk was this shadow figure that looked as demonic as anything can, really. The most prominent features were the horns, though. They curled almost all the way back to its back. In the end, I covered myself with pillows in the hopes to mask or forget about what was going on right above me. Eventually it stopped and I didn't sleep that night. To this day, I sleep with at least 10 pillows on my bed because of this as well. In that same house, my mum said that she would see a shadow figure walk to our doorways and make some sort of a symbol on our doors or doorways. Why she didn't say anything to anybody is absolutely beyond me, but that woman was kind of crazy. In that same house, I was climbing a pantry. The top of this pantry, there was a sort of space between the topmost shelf and the doorframe, probably around 2 or so. When I reached the top, this face just popped out at me. A purely white face, almost like a ceramic mask, with eyes that I can only describe as void of light. It came within inches of my face, and I instantly dropped. This was the first time that I saw its face, the first time it introduced itself to me, and since that moment, I've never been able to comfortably open a closet without the fear of seeing it. Fast forward, I'm more probably about 7 to 9 years old, playing with some Legos in a bath. The bathroom had an exhaust fan in the center of the ceiling, and as I was chilling in the tub, I recall looking up at it, this exhaust fan, and thinking, that looks kind of like a face. But I was young, so I just told myself that it was the fan moving quickly. It just sort of looked still when I looked at it. Then my older brother Justin walked in, and that was when the eyes on this face moved with a speed that I still cannot put into words, snapping onto him and following him throughout the bathroom. I told Justin he couldn't leave that bathroom without me, and the face was purely white with those black empty eyes again. That's when I recognized it again. Again, I didn't see it for years, but I was terrified to be alone. The next time I was in sophomore in high school, probably like 15 or 16. I lived in the basement of our current house. It was only me, my younger sister, and my mother in the house at this point. I also had a friend who would come over every now and then just to hang out or whatever. The way the basement was laid out, my bed was close to this sort of open room that my mum used as her closet, and on the other side of the room was the bottom entrance of the basement. So, when you come in through the basement, you turn to the right and you see the open closet, my bed, and the stairs that lead to the top floor. My friend came over one day, and as I let him in, he just starts freaking out. This kid was a very hard kind of person as well, who wouldn't show this type of reaction to most things. So naturally, I'm trying to figure out what he's freaking out at, and he tells me that he saw a white face with black eyes peeking out from that closet. Honestly, I didn't like the guy too much, so I hadn't told him about any of my experiences. But when he told me that, I moved upstairs and that fear was suddenly reignited. I never saw the face again, but I could have swore that I felt it. Then, at 24 years old, I was laying in bed with my now ex-wife, back to back, and she started screaming at me to stop poking her in the face. I never felt so cold because I was practically asleep at this point and wasn't anywhere near close to touching her face. She quickly realized this too, and she suddenly backed up to me even more. Up until my senior year in high school, I thought that I was just a schizophrenic, to be honest. It wasn't until I spoke to Justin, my older brother, that I realized that this was as real gets. As I told him what happened on that bunk bed, he suddenly started crying and tearing up pretty hard. I had only seen him cry maybe once or twice in his whole life because he made himself into this sort of macho man. So I asked him why he was crying, and he told me that the same exact thing happened to him years prior in that house in Orlando on the same exact bunk bed. That told me that it wasn't my stepdad's house, and nor was I crazy. There are more things that happened to my siblings and family. For example, in a house we resided in at Warner Robins, GA, my little sister dreamed of my little brother being stuck in the bathroom of the house, unable to get out, while these green glowing eyes were staring at him from the mirror. When she woke up, Keanu, my little brother, was in the bathroom claiming to have seen green glowing eyes. In this same house, Annalise would randomly sort of wander the house, sleepwalking, almost in a trance. My older sister Melissa and her wife Leanne caught Annalise walking around one night, and they said that they saw an orb fly past as they saw Annalise in her trance-like state. Honestly though, I think that this all started because my mum and her older sister, my Tia, played with a Ouija board when they were really young. They claimed the bed floated and my grandparents soon after threw it out or whatever. They never said bye apparently, and allegedly that's a big no-no. But all of this, it still haunts me very much. And what I really hope is that I never see that white face ever again. My mum, stepdad, and I have lived in our house for around 15 years. I'm 21. Mum says that I've had a presence attached to me since I was a baby, and honestly, that does track, because there is a very obvious presence attached to me, even still in our house, that just sort of lurks in my room. None of that really bothers me too much, nor do the noises, things we've seen in the corner of our eyes, stuff that's moved, or eerie feelings that we've gotten in our time there. But this morning, something new and a whole different level of terrifying happened. My mum left for work at 5:30. I heard her pull out of the driveway, Then at 6, the garbage man came and my dog freaked out. He was in the living room and I was laying in bed, down the hall, waiting for him to just calm down a bit. Then I heard a woman say his name very clearly, loudly and concisely. He kept barking and I perked up at this, thinking that either my mum was still home or I was hearing things. I just brushed it off when I then heard her again. She said, "Be quiet." And sure enough, my dog stopped barking. I texted my mum to make sure that she wasn't actually home, and she told me that she had been gone for 30 minutes, as I expected. So I went through the house and nobody was there. It could not have been anyone else either. I mean, nobody would have just shown up at 6 a.m., scolded my dog, and then left. Mum asked what happened, and I told her, and she told me that a week ago she was asleep in her room when she heard a woman loudly say, "Oh," right beside her ear, and she bolted up. She said that she was sure that she heard it, but had felt like she was going crazy, until I told her what I heard this morning. We described it to each other, and it's the same, a mature woman's voice. It cannot be a squatter, or at least we're pretty sure it's not. We have a crawl space that is impossible to access without knocking a bunch of stuff off the shelf in front of it, and an attic that is also impossible to access without opening an extremely loud and heavy door. What I'm wondering, though, is why this entity, or whatever it is, has decided to all of a sudden become vocal in a way that we've never seen or heard here before, when we've been here for over a decade now. Any insight would be much appreciated because, quite honestly, this is really terrifying. The house that I grew up in, the same one that my parents and one of my brothers live in to this day, is very active with, well, what we call benevolent spirits. For some quick context, I grew up sharing a house with 2 female spirits. I felt their energy, I guess you could say, had encounters, and I still notice them lingering around when I go to visit my parents to this day. One of the most intense encounters happened back in 2007, though. I was 13, my brother was 12, and the twins were 7 at this point. It was a humid day from memory, with thunderstorm warnings and dark skies. I remember it being late summer, and the whole week prior was thunderstorm after thunderstorm. The storms, they knocked the power out eventually, leaving the house dimly lit by candles and flashlights. My parents, they were in the garage, trying to get our generator to start, so that my mum could at least have a cup of tea by boiling water in the kettle. Us kids, of course, wanted to be able to charge our Nintendo DS's, since that was our obsession like many kids growing up in the mid-2000s. Anyway, I was sitting in the basement with my brothers. We were all sitting on the sectional, waiting for the power to come back on. Our DS's were all drained of power, and we were unsure of what to do. My brother Chad, he mentioned to me that he wanted to grab something from up in our bedroom that we shared, but didn't want to go up alone. I knew that he was afraid of the dark, so I didn't bother to question him anymore. We climbed the stairs from the basement, walked through the tiled hallway that connects to the kitchen, and then turned left to face the stairs going to the second floor. It was only 10 or so steps, not a very steep or strenuous climb to make by any means. There was just pitch black in front of us, but suddenly a deep, foreboding feeling just ran right through me. I always felt in tune with my intuitions, and I try my best to listen to them. But this time, things just suddenly happened before I could do anything else. With our flashlight still pointing up the stairs, lightning flashed and illuminated the hallway. Now, if you're standing where my brother and I were, you would see a hallway at the top of the stairs, which only went about 12 feet or so forward until you would run into the door to a linen closet. And, standing in front of that linen closet at the end of the hallway, suddenly there was just a woman. The brightness of the lightning almost hurt my eyes, yet I could still make out this woman standing upstairs. She was wearing a long skirt and a button-up shirt. I couldn't place an exact time period to the clothes, and I still can't to this day. I just know that it was from years, even decades prior to 2007. This figure was not facing us. She was sort of staring off to the left of the hall, towards my other brother's room. I can remember this intense feeling of fear suddenly. Now I think it was because we had no idea an apparition of a woman would appear before us, not because this spirit was evil or anything. But after what felt like a minute, Chad and I bolted towards the living room, hopping onto the couch, and we just sat there, wide-eyed and probably staring into nothing, trying to piece together what we just saw. Luckily, nothing paranormal or strange happened for the rest of that evening. We just went back downstairs, played our Nintendo Wii, hoping to forget what we saw as the generator came back on. But I remember wondering who that apparition exactly was. She was much younger than the other lady, who we named Tara. But from then on, I realized that it wasn't just Tara in our home. This woman would make more appearances in the future, and I guess, luckily for us, she would be friendly for the most part in those situations. So this happened at two instances. One on February 5th, 6:30 in the morning, and today at 6:16 a.m. So I'll start the first time that it actually happened. I went to the laundry room to put on a load of washing, and only the lights were on in the laundry room, and the light in my room, which illuminated a bit of the hallway, was there as well. So when I was finished with my laundry, I then heard footsteps, and I looked around the corner and saw a dark figure running at me with heavy footsteps. I automatically assumed that it was my brother, so I yelled his name. Then the figure took a sudden right to the living room. A bit confused because he would usually answer, I turned on the light to the living room, and to my shock, there was absolutely no one there. I went to my brother's room and asked him if he left his room, which he replied, "No, I haven't." So obviously that sent a shiver down my spine. Today, at around 6:15, still in my bed, I opened my eyes and I saw my younger brother standing next to my closet holding his tablet, not facing towards me, just whole body was pointing at my closet. I thought that was a bit weird because, my door was closed, so I closed my eyes to try to fall back asleep. Then I decided suddenly to open my eyes again, and I see him much closer, like standing on the side of my bed from me and still in the same position, just way closer. I tried to say something, but all of a sudden I felt like I just couldn't speak. I fought with that for a bit, and then eventually I said, "Talk." Multiple times I said this, then all of a sudden, whoever was there just up and vanished. I got up, unable to believe what I had just seen, went to my younger brother's room, and there he was, fast asleep in his bed. That again sent shivers down my spine. I've thought about it, and maybe it was sleep paralysis or something. I'm not sure though, because I was still able to move, and I was wide awake. And I know what sleep paralysis feels like, and it really didn't feel like that. In any case, I have no idea what to do about all of this, so if you've got any advice for me, then please do let me know. This all started when I was around the age of 14. My younger brother and I decided to swap rooms at one stage, and from the first night that I slept in my new room, weird things started happening. I usually sleep through the night, but I started abruptly waking up at exactly 2:17 a.m. on the dot every single night. Each time I would wake up, I always felt that sixth sense that something or someone was watching me from the right corner of my bedroom, always. I've felt good energy from, spirits or whatever you want to call them before, when family members have passed, but this was something different. It seemed invasive, intimidating, and I was freaked out that whatever this was could see me, but I couldn't see it. What's weird too was when I slept at my mum's house, I never woke up at 2:17, only at my dad's house. Then small occurrences started to happen too. I was staying at my mum's when my dad informed me my alarm clock radio turned on by itself in the middle of the night at full volume and woke the whole family up. I hadn't been to his house in days, and when I was home again, my little brother and we would play in the driveway. He had to go to the bathroom at one point, so he went back in the house, but all of a sudden a tennis ball came flying out of the garage. That made absolutely no sense because he was nowhere near the garage. One night I heard paper shuffling on my desk, even though the window was closed. A different morning I watched my dad's sunglasses on the kitchen counter move several inches by themselves when I was the only one awake. My older sibling, he began to believe me when random lights would come on by themselves in the house too. What's strange too is that we caught onto the pattern that the paranormal activity would happen mostly when my little brother wasn't home. Fast forward to when the house was empty, since my parents were on vacation. My grandma would check in on the house with my siblings, and each time they'd go back, a new light would be on. The last night before my parents came back from vacation, she triple-checked all the lights were off. My parents were definitely surprised when they arrived home to find every light on in the house. My grandma swore that our house was actually cursed and refused to visit anymore. My stepmom then began to believe my paranormal stories too. My older brother and I heard footsteps running up and down the stairs together one night when my younger brother was at a sleepover. It really freaked us out, and at one point, it even got sort of dangerous because the gas stove burners had been turned on by themselves on low heat overnight. If any of this had been a prank previously, I can guarantee that no one in our family would mess around like that, putting our lives in danger. My dad finally began to believe me too about maybe 8 months into this haunting when all of the kids weren't home one night, and he apparently heard whispering in the hallway. He freaked out, grabbed his knife thinking that there was a robber. When he opened the door, he found my TV had turned on by itself and people were talking on the TV with low volume. The last thing to ever happen was one night I came out of the shower and I went to change into my room. The mirror was foggy from the steam. My older brother knocked on my door and asked what I wrote on the mirror. Confused, I went in to look, and we both sat there in awe as letters began to actually show up in front of us slowly. The whole family quickly gathered around to decipher it, and it said, "I am watching," and then there was a word that we couldn't quite figure out. Our family didn't know how to justify what we saw, and after that day, the occurrences just all of a sudden stopped. I stopped waking up every night. There were no footsteps, nothing. A year later, my dad called me and said that he found something really weird on my brother's birth certificate. He asked, "Didn't you used to say that Nick, our younger brother, was somehow connected to, like, the haunted stuff that happened in the house or whatever?" After confirming, he casually mentioned that my younger brother was born at exactly 2:17 a.m. I was pretty much speechless. I mean, there was no way that this was a coincidence. From that day on, I have had so many more questions than answers too. 2 years ago, I had a psychic medium meeting, and after sharing my story, she said how the entity targeted me because I acknowledged it. It was no longer in the house. She confidently said that an entity like that is attached to an object or a person that has since left the house, which means that I definitely think that something was, or maybe is, attached to my younger brother. So, a few weeks back, I shared a story about potentially being watched by someone that was lurking outside of my house. I don't know if you guys remember it, but the TLDR is that I saw someone walking around outside of our house, sort of down the side of our house, with burglar lights coming on next to the free library that my parents had set up just outside of our house. So, to cut a long story short, there hasn't been any activity since that night. But I was on a phone call the very next night with a friend when I noticed someone standing outside, completely shrouded in darkness. I proceeded to talk loudly about how some creep was watching me, and they'd better watch out. Stupid, yes, I know, but it seemed to work because all was pretty much quiet after that. Or so I thought. You see, tonight was one of my oldest friends' last nights in town, so I was out till about 9:30, drove 2 friends home and then myself. Since it was so early, I wasn't that worried, but still alert. I drove up the side of the street that he hit on last time, even though it was out of my way, and saw nothing out of the ordinary. I noticed one of the new houses that's being built had its lights on, which I didn't think much of at that moment. Fast forward an hour though, and I start hearing a weird, sort of loud banging sound across the way. I know that it's risky, but I'm not letting a horrible person dictate my comfort. And I've also been watching for activity or pretending, so I can maybe catch them. I've also kept my window open as usual, hence why it was dumb to razz him up the other night by talking about someone watching me, but I digress. Whatever it was, it stopped, so I wrote it off, which was in the end a very big mistake. Because shortly after, I started hearing banging again, but this time I could actually feel it. It was coming from my house. I genuinely freaked out, like knives out status, but much more cowardly, cowering on my bedroom floor with my ear pressed to the door and knife in hand. It was a strange hollow sound that didn't seem like the front door, and in the end it wasn't. I once again called 911, describing what was happening and thinking that they probably are going to write it off because I sort of sounded crazy. I still feel in shock because, this only just happened, but thankfully the kind dude on the line definitely took me seriously and said someone would be on their way. For the record too, the police department is like a 3-minute drive from my house. I ended up tiptoeing downstairs to see and once again felt my heart stop. I went to the front window, ducked down, and there wasn't anyone at the front door. Then the banging starts up again, and I can tell how close it is now. I go to the side window that overlooks the garage, and that was when I saw him, dressed in black, hood pulled far over his face, banging wildly on the garage door with a crowbar. I honestly don't know why he wasn't using the crowbar to break in or whatever, but I'm super glad that he didn't, as the door inside the garage that leads into the house, it's always left unlocked. To say that I panicked is honestly a vast understatement. I nearly wet myself, which is understandable, right? I'm just standing there, peeking out of the window, watching this guy wail on my garage door with a crowbar, thinking how unhinged he must be and how much I want the cops to get here now, when, just like before, suddenly he just runs off. I quite literally just got done giving a report to the cops that showed up. My family was woken up and had to talk to them as well, as they're the homeowners. And now they're both so freaked out that my dad just ordered 4 exterior cameras to monitor the house. I really don't think it's over yet too. This man has some reason that he's targeting my house, possibly me, who knows, since he started out by watching outside of my window. But whatever the case, we are definitely thinking about security now and exactly what steps we need to take next. So, I'm coming here for some advice because I feel some sort of dreadful presence in my house, specifically in my kitchen and living room, but they aren't separated. I'm 20 and I live with just my mum. I don't really know where to start, but I've had multiple different physical things happen in my kitchen while I'm home. Let me also say, though, that I moved into this house not even a full 2 years ago, and I've never had previous encounters with anything paranormal. I guess I'll just run down the list of encounters, starting with the first one and leading up to the most recent. So, the first instance was maybe about 2 or 3 months after I moved in. My mum, whose bedroom is on the first floor, said that she woke up at about 3 a.m. to wind chimes making noise in our kitchen. She walked out there and actually also saw them moving. My mum loves wind chimes, and before this she always had some inside, but we took them down after this because there was no wind. The second instance was, this was the first event I actually saw with my own eyes. Last winter, maybe around November of 2022, I was sitting with my ex-girlfriend on the couch watching TV in the living room. We had been there for maybe 35 to 45 minutes when, out of nowhere, my lunchbox flies off of the top of the refrigerator and lands on the floor about 5 feet in front of it. I paused the show and was absolutely freaked out since the only people home at that time were me and her, so I picked it up and put it back on top of the fridge. My ex was already freaked out, so we both just went upstairs. I'm not sure if this is important or not too, but afterwards I told my sister, who is well versed with pagan witchcraft practices, to read tarot cards regarding this situation. A few times she pulled cards with cats playing on them. She told me the spirit is likely a dead pet that wants someone to play with. She also did some sort of a sage ritual at this time as well. Again, I don't know if it's helpful or not, or if it's related or whatever, but I just thought that I should throw that in. Now, the third incident, and this happened 2 days ago, and this was the second thing I actually saw with my own eyes. I have a home gym, and sometimes I'll work out after work, and 2 days ago I was home alone, just working out in the basement, and when I finished, I walked upstairs to the kitchen to make my protein drink and eat some strawberries. There was the creepy feeling as always in that room, but I try to ignore it. I was standing at the kitchen sink, rinsing off strawberries and eating them, and I looked up out of the window that's behind the sink. It was completely dark in my backyard at this point, and I couldn't see anything but the reflection of the room behind me. When I looked up, I saw what appeared to be a blurry black figure moving very quickly from one side of the living room behind me to the other. I couldn't make out any features because I only saw it for about a half a second, and I don't even know if it had any at all, to be honest. And when I say fast, I mean this thing was fast, like the same speed of a human full sprinting from like one side of my living room to another. I instantly turned around, but there was absolutely nothing there. I was freaking out though, and I started saying stuff like, "Whatever you are, you're not welcome here and you need to leave. This is my house, I live here, and I don't want you here. You need to go." Then I walked upstairs and laid in my bed until my mum got home, because I don't get this eerie or creepy feeling when there's somebody else home. Eventually I showered and I went to bed. The fourth instance, after instance 3, I debated not saying anything to my mum because, well, I don't want to freak her out since she sleeps on the first floor. But last night I decided that I'd tell her, and she was understandably a little bit freaked out by it. This morning my mum calls me while I'm at work and tells me that she herself was withholding experiences from me too because she also didn't want to freak me out. Now, my mum runs a small business out of the part of the basement located directly underneath the kitchen and living room, and she told me that she has at least a dozen times heard footsteps in the kitchen above her walking around when she is sure that she is the only one home. Apparently, this is why she plays her music so loud when she's down there. From my phone call with her this morning, I learned she got into contact with some people from her church, and soon she'll be having someone who specializes in spirits or whatever to come and take a look. Now, the fifth and final instance, I'm not entirely sure if this was just in my head or an actual encounter because, I was actually on something that day. Not my first time, so I know how to function, but about a month ago, I decided to trip in my house with my current girlfriend and 2 other friends. For the majority of the trip, we stayed upstairs watching some TV shows. The Midnight Gospel on Netflix, highly recommend by the way. And I had to go downstairs to take a pee, so I went down by myself, and I swear that while I was coming down the stairs, I saw what looked to be a woman's face smiling in a really unsettling way at me from the couch. I had some laundry on the couch, and I saw the face vividly in the laundry. This really disturbed me too, and I just sprinted to the bathroom to take a pee, and then I sprinted back upstairs for the rest of the night. I would also like to add that in the mornings before work, 5:45 a.m., still very dark outside, and at nighttime, when I'm in the kitchen by myself, I feel an uncomfortable sensation, almost like the feeling you get when somebody is watching you. Of course, every time I look around, I'm alone, but I just feel this sense of intense dread. My house is also silent, and rarely ever do I hear any noise from outside, since my house is surrounded on 3 sides with trees. All of these accounts, though, they are honest, and I believe that I described what I've seen and my experiences to the best of my ability. I would really appreciate any advice that people can give me on how to get rid of this thing, as it's low-key scaring the heck out of me, and it's causing me not to like going into my kitchen or living room at nighttime. Back in October of 2004, I lost a cousin that I was close to due to an accidental overdose. His brother Mick and I are even closer because we are close to the same age, and we pretty much were raised in the same house as brother and sister as well. One day in February of 2005, Mick called me, and he sounded very upset about a phone call that he had received. So I told him to come to my house so that I could figure out what he was talking about. When he got out of his car, he was as white as a sheet and shaking. This is what he told me when he was finally able to calm down. He said that he was driving when his phone rang. It was one of his parents calling from their house. Since he was driving, he let the call go to voicemail and pulled over to call them back, not bothering to listen to the voicemail. He said that his dad answered the phone, and both his parents denied even calling him in the first place, even though Mick's caller ID clearly indicated that someone else in the house had called him when the voicemail was recorded. After hanging up with his parents, Mick decided to see what the voicemail had to say. After he listened to it, that's when he called me in a panic. He refused to tell me anything about the voicemail. Instead, he just queued it up and shoved the phone up to my ear so that I could hear it for myself. And I will never forget that voicemail. I felt the color drain from my face, and I felt like I was going to pass out. I distinctly heard my cousin, who had been dead for nearly 4 months at this point, say, "It's me, I'm here, and I need your help." My cousin also had a very unusual cadence and sound to his speech. It was unmistakably him leaving a voicemail from his parents' home phone number where he accidentally overdosed and lost his life. But he seemed scared or worried or something. Unfortunately, 11 years later, there was a house fire that destroyed everything in the house, including that voicemail that we had pulled off of Mick's phone and saved on a computer. But that voicemail, it changed my life drastically, and my cousin and I dove into researching the paranormal ever since then. I really wish that I still had that voicemail recording too. And while that's not proof positive for a lot of other people, and I know that there are skeptics who aren't going to believe my experience, I wanted to share why I became an investigator in the first place. And also I'm wondering if any of you guys are into the paranormal and why did you guys get into it? I would love to hear about your experiences as well if you'd be willing to share. The last time that I had sleep paralysis, it was very, for a lack of a better term, demonic. I felt and saw the presence of 3 entities, one on top of me, one in the corner, and one trying to unlock my bedroom door. I never sleep with my door unlocked. My sister, the previous day, also had the same occurrence, and I will never forget that my mum said that week she had heard stuff in the room. This time it was the last night, and significantly less demonic. I opened my eyes and could feel the sleep paralysis starting to take over me, and I violently started to try and shake my leg and snap out of it. I could feel someone in the room, though, shaking my bed violently trying to harass me. Mind you, ever since I had my first sleep paralysis, if I'm alone, I sleep with my LED lights on dim and never lay on my back because I feel vulnerable and prone to sleep paralysis if I do. My first time doing that was very traumatizing, let me tell you. Now, back to what I was seeing. I was on my back and could only look straight up and see what was in my vision range. I sleep by a window and I could see a ridiculous amount of flies around the curtains hung at my window. The only time that you can see that amount of flies is if something is dead or rotten. I was really confused. I was violently trying to wake my body up. I could really only mutter a prayer to save myself from things getting potentially worse. I then felt a pressure on my chest like the last time I had it. Only this time I couldn't see a demon until towards the end when I saw an entity slowly trying to creep on top of me wearing a white sweater and floral pants. The nightmare was over soon enough for me to wake up completely confused and startled. But the weirdest thing was that those flies, they were real. They were all over the curtain and it absolutely freaked me out. I instantly ran out of the room and went to get some spray for all of them. But can anyone explain this? It was so weird. Praying seems to be my only way out. I would generally consider myself a skeptic. I don't really believe in this kind of stuff, usually, but I've been having some strange experiences. I don't really have anyone else to turn to, so I hope that this place might get me some answers, or at the very least, rule out some options. So, it started back a few months ago. My house is small and only has 3 tiny bedrooms. The majority of the time I've lived here, there are 5 people here. I shared a room with my sister up until October of 2023, when my brother moved out and she took his old room. A while after that is when I started to notice odd things. At first, it was generally just paranoia, I guess. In my room, and only in my room for at least an hour before I go to sleep, I would get really paranoid. It could be a feeling of being watched or sort of being hyper-aware of noises, but I would just be really anxious. Then things picked up a bit. I started to feel something hovering over my ear, never seeing anything but feeling it deeply. That sort of tickle when somebody whispers to you. Like that, but just hovering over my ear. This only ever happened to my right ear as well, which was strange. It just so happens that when I lay on my left side, I face a mirror as it's my closest door. Apparently that's bad luck, I hear, but anyway, it goes on from here because one night as I was drifting off to sleep, I heard a man clearly whisper, "Stay awake," in my right ear, which scared the heck out of me for obvious reasons. And I felt that same hovering sort of watched feeling as well. Lately too, I've noticed things moving across my vision. Shadows in the corner of my eyes and little white blurs across my vision. This really only ever happens in my bedroom and not much else. I've also noticed something worse when I sleep as well. You see, I often sleep with my hand under my pillow, and sometimes my hand peeks out from under the pillow, and that is when it happens. Something is, well, grabbing my hand. It always starts at my index finger and pulls slightly on it as if trying to be discreet. Then it works its way to my pinky. Then it goes back to the index finger, only this time it makes sort of small circular motions with it while pressing it on my pillow lightly. It does this with each one until it reaches my pinky. Then after that, it always shakes my headboard. I've also noticed that my mattress shakes slightly while I sleep, which is definitely not normal. And as far as I can recall, this is all the detail that I have as of now. I'm really worried that I have a ghost of some kind in my house, and I'm also worried because, well, mental illness runs in my family and my grandpa had schizophrenia. So here I am asking you, do I have a ghost or should I be evaluated instead? And if I do have a ghost, well, what can I do about it? I'll try to answer as many responses as possible, so feel free to ask or clarify anything in the comments below. I'll try to answer as many responses as possible, so feel free to ask any clarification or comments or whatever below. When I was 17, I started working for a racehorse trainer and I decided to try and cycle to my new job. Working with horses meant early starts, so my bike ride was in the dark because it was late winter, around January I think. It was 29 years ago in fact, so hard to remember, but the road that I had to cycle on ran partially along the coastline in a series of sweeping S-bends. On one side was cliff face, with nowhere to get off the road for about a mile. On the other, railings and a steep drop down to the sea. Now, as I'm cycling, I notice someone walking ahead on the road in my bike light. They had their back to the traffic, which was just me at the time, and were wearing jeans, a dark mauve bomber jacket, and a backpack as well. Now, I want to emphasize here that this was slightly uphill and I was cycling really slowly, so I had a lot of time to take all this in. I remember thinking that they were walking on the wrong side of the road, but also that if they walked the other side, it wasn't much safer, I guess. I remember watching them walking steadily in front of me, and as I got closer, I was trying to breathe slowly so I didn't sound so unfit and embarrass myself. It wasn't so unusual to see people walking like this, because the area at the time was very rural and there was no bus in town until you get into like the main village, which was the direction that we were headed, so I figured that they were walking to catch a bus for work or whatever. But before I drew up beside him, I pulled away a little to give him some room, then called out morning, so I didn't startle the guy. And as I did though, I suddenly realized that he just wasn't there. What I mean too is that he didn't fade away or anything like that. He just wasn't there anymore. The reason that it scared me so much at the time too is that I had spent probably 3 or 4 minutes coming up behind this guy who walked very normally and honestly looked very solid. And then all of a sudden he was just gone. I have other stories, but they're more noises and feelings, that kind of thing. But this is the one thing that I will always hand on heart insist was a real ghost encounter, and not something explained away easily by anyone. Also, after this, I managed to secure a ride with another employee, so I never had to cycle that road again. Some brief background before I begin. So, we moved into our place about 2 months ago with my fiancé. I never noticed anything weird, but my fiancé did. Now it's escalating and honestly I feel bad about dismissing his concerns. Also, we cannot afford to move. It started with his contact lens container. He has one that vibrates to move the lenses and the liquid around to clean them. I don't have contacts, so I may be wrong there or whatever, but either way, it vibrates for some reason. Anyway, he comes to me and says, "I think that this place is haunted." I ask him why he says that, and he says that something has been messing with his contact lenses stuff. He says that when he went to the bathroom that night, the case began to vibrate by itself on the ledge. Also, the bottle of cleaner wasn't where he left it. I tell him that it probably malfunctioned, or he hadn't properly switched it off or whatever, so him closing the bathroom door jangled the shelf enough to turn it back on. I didn't dwell too much on it, and he didn't bring it up again. Now, I have an iPhone, and so I have to manually put my phone on and off silent mode. I never put my phone on silent, as there are calls that I can't miss. I'm also the only relative that lives near to my elderly parents, and if there's an emergency, I need to know about it ASAP. Point being, my phone is never ever on silent. But twice now, in the span of a single week, it's been put on silent mode overnight, and I've missed calls the next day because of it. Neither times, though, was it done by me. I asked my fiancé if he had done it, and he said no, but he knows the situation and he just wouldn't do that. Anyway, fast forward to last night. My fiancé is sick and he's tossing and turning in bed. I stay awake mostly to keep an eye on him, and also because he's moving around too much for me to sleep. I kept the TV on with the brightness down, but it's enough for me to see the room in. And at some point, I close my eyes for a while, but then I'm sort of jolted awake. But above my bed, I see a thing coming from the ceiling. Not an entire entity, but sort of a large, darkly colored hand with more than 5 fingers on it. I wasn't in a position to count them, but there were definitely more than 5. Upon looking at it, the hand thing disappears back into the ceiling in a weird fading kind of way. I rolled out of bed, switched my lamp on, and I haven't gone back to sleep since. Mostly I've just been sitting in bed with a cup of tea to keep an eye on my fiancé while he sleeps. There's some weird stuff going on in this house, and I really don't know what to do about it. Also, I should probably mention that we regularly hear things walking on the roof at night. I always put it down to it just being an animal, while my fiancé always felt differently about it. Now I'm really not so sure anymore. This was 2004, and Mars was brightly visible in the sky. I was 14, and I had a habit of talking with the neighbor kid to the left of me through our windows, doing shenanigans like pointing a laser at the TV of our neighbors across or just stargazing alone. This was one of those nights, a night where I was stargazing alone. I sat perched on my bed with my elbows on the windowsill, and the window pane slid fully open while creating an opening using my body between the vertical shades. I was looking at the constellations to try and spot Mars. It was nearing summer. It took me a while to notice, but then I saw something strange in my neighbor's yard to the right. Mind you, I had watched the neighborhood in darkness many times and was completely familiar with my surroundings. This yard, though, was at the corner with the right side of the garden connecting to the wall of another 3-story house, so it had a lot of shade and it was pretty dark. Each garden in our neighborhood was fenced off for privacy and security. I would say each garden was about 300 to 320 square feet. But in the middle of this backyard, I saw eyes stare at me. It took me a while to process what I was looking at. There were 3 eyes, set in a triangle shape that gleamed like a cat's eyes. When I had fully accepted that this did not belong there usually, I suddenly felt fear wash over me because I couldn't comprehend what I was looking at, and it was staring right back at me. I dropped myself into my bed, my heart racing, but I wanted to verify if I really saw something odd. So I quickly shot back up, pushed the shades aside, and looked. I caught it too, mid-move. and while it moved, it was now half behind the fence that separated my backyard with the neighbors. While it moved, it turned back to face me and stood still. This all happened in like 3 to 4 seconds. Because it was now half behind the fence, only the top and right eye were facing me, still shimmering and reflecting like a cat's eye. I was very freaked out though, that it relocated itself closer to me and I had caught it mid-movement. Because of the position next to the fence, I could also deduce that, whatever it was really tall. Not as high as the fence, which would have been around 6 to 6'3", but close to it. It was then that I really freaked out inside and dropped myself back on my bed again. A few seconds ticked, but I felt so afraid of it crawling into my window that I just slammed it shut in one go. A few moments passed and then I heard the eeriest sound from the garden. A very high-pitched sort of buzzing sound, twice in a row, like nothing I'd ever heard before, so it's hard to describe, but sort of like an unbroken, trembling, high-pitched bleep that repeated itself twice. And after that, silence. I have spent years confused by what I really saw, and I checked this garden multiple times a day and night to find plausible, rational explanations as to what may have occurred. When I tell this story to people that I know and take an interest in paranormal stuff and the like, they always tell me that it's an incredibly detailed encounter and encourage me to share it with people with more know-how, I guess. So I guess that this is my attempt to entertain and perhaps receive an explanation, or at least confirmation that someone else shares a similar story to this. Because, like I said, I don't know what to think. So, I'm a skeptic. I don't really believe in paranormal stuff, but I would still probably refuse to be alone in a haunted place, and I get uneasy around ghost stuff. There was also something peculiar that happened when I was a child that I remember vividly, but I have no real rationale for, and I'd like to get some ideas as to what it was or could have been. Maybe get some takes from the more paranormal-aligned folk here, too, as to what specifically it could have been. So, I grew up in a council estate in northwest England, quite a poor area, and I believe it was built upon a small Italian POW camp some years after World War II actually ended. I'm not sure about that, but there's some local stories about haunted pubs and such, and my mum would always be watching paranormal TV shows like Most Haunted, so any notion of Occam's razor was firmly out the window, and I would quickly assume something was a ghost, etc. There were many stories of a black shadow moving through the terrace we lived in as I was growing up, and this was a common story shared between neighbors, but this could easily just have been a lie. But to get to the main story, I was probably around maybe 11 or 12 years old when this happened. I'm 25 now. My parents and my younger sister, they had left for a school performance and I'd stayed at home. I assumed I was home alone until I heard some noise downstairs. I go and check it out, and there's nobody there. I assumed it was my older sister, who could have been home. Turns out, though, that she was at a party, and then I heard footsteps upstairs. I step outside into the front garden to check my parents' bedroom window, and their bedroom light was turned on miraculously. I was certain, though, that it was turned off before, as I turned it off myself after they left. I was sure my sister was at home, so I go back inside, lock the door, and I go check upstairs. I check upstairs and there's nobody there. Nobody hiding anywhere either. I turn the light back off and then I hear a loud crash in the kitchen downstairs, so I run down to see what was happening and I see a plate on the ground smashed along with every single cupboard door flung wide open. The cupboard where the plates were was on the left-hand side, raised above the counter, and I think it was only a single plate broken, but I was that terrified that I didn't dare stick around to find out. I opted to run next door to sit with them until my parents got home, maybe like an hour or so later, and they didn't really much believe me, and that was really disappointing. It was definitely only me in the house at the time, though, and I just can't think of what it could be. There were a few more unexplained things that happened in that house, but we also lived in the house 2 doors down, too, which had even more unexplained stories according to my mum. But there were things like black shadow figures, lights turning on and off, and very rarely on occasion, things seeming to move. But this was by far the strangest incident that had ever happened to me. So, what could it have been from a paranormal standpoint? I'm not sure if I will believe it, but I'm definitely interested to learn more and potentially uncover some explanation about what it could have been. Always best to keep an open mind with these things, is what I say. My cousin and I are the same age. We're both women and currently 25 years old. She's only 5 days younger than me, and her family rented a floor in my parents' house when we were toddlers, so we basically did everything together and spent all of our days together until we turned 5, when her family bought an apartment in another city, some 30 kilometers away from the city that I lived in. Since we had a very strong connection, almost codependent, it was very difficult for us to get used to not living together, and 2 years later, we had made an arrangement with our parents that we'll visit each other each weekend, and during the summer break she'll spend 1 week at our place and I'll spend the other week at their place, and we all basically exchanged like that until the end of the summer break. This went on for years too. Since we were spending all of our free time together, by the time that we turned 10 or 11, we have already exhausted all of our adventure ideas in the backyard: tree climbing, building a tree house, setting up tents, camping in the backyard, etc. We really needed something new, so we had decided to go fishing together every Friday on the river near my house. It's a 20-minute walk away. Now, of course, we didn't have any tools needed for a true fishing experience. We had a butterfly net that we would place in the water, and on a good day, we would catch about a dozen of tiny fish with it. That was enough for our restaurant game that we would like to play. We would come back home, bake the fish under the sunlight, and then serve it, and decorate it into plastic plates that we would later serve to our imaginary customers. We've done this for weeks at this point, and always made sure that we were safe while doing it. We never actually got into the river, is what I'm saying. And that wasn't that difficult since it's a very peaceful neighborhood. We call it the Yellow Bridge, and there was usually no one else at the river at the time that we were there. But one day, it was different. Very different. This is how I remember it as well. So, a couple of days ago, the memory of this encounter suddenly spilled out into my mind. We were either 10 or 11 years old. It was a Friday. She was at our place that week, so we took the butterfly net and went fishing on the river. We were alone, sitting under a large willow tree right next to the river, when suddenly, a man just showed up from, well, what seemed like nowhere. He was standing a couple of meters away from us. He had blackish hair with plenty of shades of grey in it, so I'm guessing that he was probably in his late 40s or early 50s. He had a dark blue t-shirt, a little smudged on the collar. He asked us what we were doing, and we said that we were fishing. He continued walking back and forth on that part of the shore. Now under the Yellow Bridge, the shore itself is at least 500 meters long. He could have gone anywhere, but he stayed where we were at. Then he came a little bit closer and we got up. He then told us that he was apparently having issues with his wife, and we just nodded our heads, trying to avoid the conversation and follow the don't talk to strangers rule. We didn't ask him anything. He took a flip phone out of his pocket and he opened it in front of us. "I have to show you my wife," he said. Okay, we replied. When he found what he was looking for, he came even closer and turned the phone towards us. It was a picture of a completely naked woman sitting in a chair with her legs apart. We just nodded. He then proceeded to show us more pictures, and it was quite clear that it wasn't his wife because the pictures were not of the same woman, but all of them were inappropriate from head to toe. And now that I think of it, the quality of the images, the fashion and the aesthetics could be best described as, well, inappropriate content from the 70s that you'd probably find in a magazine if you catch my drift. It could have been that he took pictures from an old magazine or had them sent by someone. I don't know, but I remember that I looked at my cousin and mouthed, "It's not his wife," and she nodded. "Isn't she beautiful?" he asked. Yeah, she is," I replied, and my cousin nodded. We then remembered that we had left our net in the river, so we went back to the willow tree and reached for the net. He was standing there in the same spot as before, looking at his phone. He then showed us very low-quality pictures of men and other women in other suggestive positions, and these pictures actually looked like pictures taken with a flip phone camera. "This is me," he said, and pointed at one of the men in the picture. We just nodded, and we said that we had to go home at this point. But he then said the words that honestly have been haunting me for days now. "You think my wife is beautiful? She thinks you're beautiful too. She would love to meet you. Come with me to meet her and we can play together." No, we have to go home," I replied. You little party breaker. Maybe your friend doesn't want to go home. Come on, I want to play with you," he said and turned to my cousin. "No, I really want to go home," my cousin replied. Now, this is where the details of the memory sort of stop for me. What I remember next is him giving up, just not being there anymore, and us leaving, giggling and laughing as we walked away and mocked his voice and his tone on our way back home. But I found it weird that only after so many years had I remembered this situation, and I've brushed it off as a potential dream or false memory even. But since his words kept echoing in my head, I called my cousin and described my memory, word for word as I've described it here pretty much, and she said that it did happen, just slightly different from how I remembered it. She explained that all the details are correct, but once she told him that she really wants to go home, he was way too close and we were too scared to start running or turn our backs, since we thought that he would catch us. So we stayed there for a while and kept pretending like he was not there. We played with our catch, the tiny fish in a bucket filled with water, and talked about our fathers who work in the police. Obviously it was a lie. Her father is a forest ranger and mine works in IT. And how they're so strong and they could kill a man with one punch. The man didn't believe our exaggerated story, and apparently he kept walking in circles around us. Not too close, but he did keep an eye on us the entire time. So we waited, and waited and waited, and at one point he went into the bushes behind us to pee. This is when we got up and we started running. We ran across the bridge and kept running until we got to the part of the neighborhood where there are lots of houses. When we were already close to my house, I stopped in the middle of the road and said that my legs won't move. So she helped me get down on the side of the road and we sat there until I felt better. Then apparently we started joking. Today I know that what I experienced was a state of shock. Once I felt better, we went back home, threw away the fish, and after that, we decided never to go fishing again. We never told our parents because we knew that what had happened had something to do with inappropriate material, and at that time, we thought that everything related to that topic was shameful and shouldn't be talked about. She said, though, that she was surprised that I thought it was a dream and that I didn't remember it until now, since I have had such an extreme reaction and she has PTSD from that event. Even today, she's not going alone anywhere and is terrified whenever someone mentions that same yellow bridge. So many years ago, I became a certified nurse assistant. It was a simple job. Basically, we're taking care of adults all day. Now, I've had my fair share of scary stuff, wiping butts, cleaning poop off the floor, but these came with the job. And quite frankly, you become sort of numb to it after a while anyway. But that's not what I want to share. I wanted to tell my experience of when a patient is close to death. What I mean is that scary things tend to happen in the days leading up to it. So let's start with my first experience. I won't name names due to laws and regulations, but we'll start with Jay. Now, Jay was a retired Marine who saw combat in Vietnam, and also a retired chef. Jay was one bad dude. Years of smoking created a hole in his throat, so it was hard for him to talk, although you could understand some things. Now, the first thing to change when close to death is smell coming from one person's body. It's hard to explain, but it just sort of smells like rotting meat. I know, horrible, but when I noticed the smell on Jay, I sat with Jay and talked about life in general. I'm trying not to talk about death, but steering it that way. We finally got onto the topic, and Jay's just whole attitude sort of flip-flopped. He put up a hand, signaling me to stop talking. He took a deep breath and mustered up some words. Last night, there was men in my room. My heart sank. Tall and dark, wearing top hat. I could visibly see the fear in Jay's eyes. Combat and being a sheriff in the 80s couldn't have prepared him for what he saw that night. I had a blank stare. I didn't know what to tell him. He was visibly stressed, though. He shrugged his shoulders at me and continued watching his show. Maybe an hour or so passed. Jay was in the living room and I was in the kitchen. The TV volume was up a bit due to Jay's hearing. We both sort of jumped when we heard a loud bang in his room across the way. It wasn't a normal sound, though. It sounded like somebody had chucked a piece of steak at the floor. It was such a distinctive sound. Even with Jay's hearing, he heard it too. He looked over to me with eyebrow raised. I assumed that it was somebody in the house. I looked at Jay and told him to stay put. I needed to check the house. Now, I slowly rounded the corner to the hall. I looked slowly towards his door and saw a shadow from under the door, and finally yelled, "Get out of this house now or I'll call the police." I opened the door quickly, but there was nothing. Everything was untouched and in its place. Windows and curtains were left as is. I searched the whole room, but there was no one. I went back to Jay and explained what had happened. He gave me a look and said, "Dark man." I was frozen, scared to turn around, but I quickly turned to see nothing behind me. But Jay was fixed on the corner of the hall. He could see something that I couldn't. Now, Jay, being the sort of fella that he was, flipped off the air and turned back to his show. I'm freaking out now. I proceeded to search the whole house, every door and nook, under the beds, in closets. Nothing. It was all empty. My shift of 12 hours was about to end. The other nurse finally arrived. I let them in and explained what was going on. But they too are creeped out since they have the overnight shift. But in the end, I left with a lot of questions and really spooked. Fast forward to the next day, I get a call saying that Jay had passed away during the night, but they had found him on the floor beside his bed. The overnight nurse heard a loud thump in the middle of the night and rushed into the room to find Jay on the floor, not breathing, no pulse. Since he had a DNR, there was nothing that we could do. Days later, it was determined that he had a heart attack and tried to leave the bed. He had rolled to the edge of the bed and his body rolled off the side, hitting the floor, making a sound like meat hitting a solid floor. The same sound heard the very day before by me and Jay. So, on to experience number 2. I once did live-in care for this man, F. F was an older gentleman. He lived in a 110-year-old Victorian home. He was a lifelong mechanic, and he was also really smart. He was diagnosed with dementia and Alzheimer's, a mix that would cause a lot of confusion and combative incidents. Besides this, though, he really was as sharp as could be. Now, this one particular night, F seemed on edge. I asked what was going on. He explained that he has recently been hearing things, that it was hard for him to sleep. I sort of shrugged it off and helped him into bed. I walked to my room and snuggled into bed, ready to sleep. A few minutes passed by and I heard a yell coming from F's room. I jumped up and ran over. F was in the corner of his bed, full fetal position, scared out of his mind. I flicked the light on and asked what's going on. F explained that there was a demon sitting on his desk in the corner watching him. He explained its skin was black like burnt and charred, its eyes sunken with black voids. He said that it smiled at him. Now, as a med professional, it is imperative that we keep a professional standpoint. But that night, I have to admit, it shook me to the core. I talked about God with him and prayed with him. All the time, F is glancing around me at the desk over and over. He had a sort of look of despair on his face. We finished talking and I head toward the door, but then F, the manliest man that I'd ever really known, asked the weirdest question with reasonable cause. He said, "Will you sleep on my bed with me?" I sort of chuckled and asked, "Why would I?" He cut me off and, with pure fear in his eyes, says, "Because it has never left. It's still there. While you were praying, it was mimicking what you were saying in the sort of low demonic tone." Now, I'm completely spooked. Quite honestly, nothing could have prepared me for that response. I tried my best to keep a straight face, remember professionalism. I responded, "Of course, but I'll sleep on the recliner in the corner." Needless to say, I didn't sleep that whole night. A few weeks passed and it was morning. I was helping F out of bed. He turned quickly and was fixed on the old oak stairs out the door. He was very distracted all of a sudden. He didn't speak the whole time, and when we walked down the stairs, he was fixed on the top the whole time too. Anyway, we sat down for breakfast. He dropped his fork on the plate and sat back, looked me in the eyes. He pointed to the doorway in the kitchen. "Are those your nieces or something?" I was taken aback. "What?" I asked, confused. "Those kids there, are they with you?" Now I began to feel a cold wind down my back, and chills formed from my head to toe. "F, there are no children there." But then, I heard a child's laugh come from the staircase. I jump up. F turns toward the corner of the room and asks the wall, "How long have you been dead?" I screamed out, "F, what are you talking about?" "The children, their clothes look old, and their faces sort of sunken in. They look like they've been decaying for a long time." By now, I jumped up and explained that I needed a moment. I walked out of the kitchen more scared than I had ever been. I eventually collected myself and returned. F was there, unfazed, eating his eggs, and I just sat there, not knowing what to do. Now, most of my experiences have been somewhat scary, even terrifying, but definitely what tops the books is death itself. There are just so many unknowns with that. Many people fear death because the afterlife is an unexplainable thing. We only have testimonies from people who have passed for a certain number of minutes. I'm fortunate enough to have never brushed with death, but I've witnessed it firsthand a number of times. And here is one of those stories with the ending hours of F's life. So, months had passed since the whole kitchen incident. Not much scary things had happened besides the occasional noise in the house or footsteps on the oak staircase. Most of the house was original wood floors. Remember that this house was about 110 years old, so anomalies weren't too worrisome. I can only imagine the number of things that happened in that old house, though. In those months, though, F has had a steady decline in health. It had gotten to the point that he no longer would talk or eat. Hospice is involved now too. For those who don't know, it's an organization that helps with those close to death. The hospice's goal is to provide comfort. So F, most of the time, was given regular doses of morphine to make his pending passing more comfortable. I walked into F's room to make some routine vitals. I held his wrist with my pointer and middle finger looking for a pulse. Strange, I said to myself. His pulse was barely there. Med personnel call it thread pulse, and it was really slow. I began counting his breathing. I'm in my head watching his chest rise then fall. 1, I would say to myself. I don't remember the exact count, but I do remember panicking. It was way too low for oxygen intake. Like most elderly people, DNRs are in effect, so I really couldn't do much. I knew that he would pass within a few hours, so in order to make his passing comfortable, I put up a chair. I began reading a book to him. The last thing to deteriorate is hearing, apparently. Even when comatose, people can still hear what's around them sometimes. I was about halfway through the book. For sake of information, F has been comatose and in a fluid state due to the morphine that he doesn't respond or move anymore. But right now, I was about to have the biggest jump scare of my life, because F's eyes shot open and began scanning the room at a fast pace. He reached out and grabbed my arm. My heart hit my throat. His breathing intensified. It was quick and shallow. I began trying to pull away. I grabbed F's hand, his eyes fixed on me. I was looking right into his eyes, and he had this 1,000-yard stare going on. Blank, no expression. He didn't say anything, but I was petrified. I didn't move, just stared into F's eyes. His breathing slowed. A tear began to fall from his eye. I mustered up the courage. I said, "It's okay, F, it's time to go. Don't be afraid, I'm here with you. You're not alone." And with that, he took a deep breath, and I watched his life leave his eyes. It's hard to explain the experience or how you can literally see life leave somebody's eyes. His grip, though, loosened on my arm. His hand turned ice cold. His hand fell to his side. Watching his last breath wasn't a fearful one. More like a relief, I guess. Like it was finally over. I watched fearful eyes turn into blank, dilated pupils. His head fell forward to his pillow, eyes still locked on mine. Even after passing, his eyes stayed open. I reached for his wrist. It was still warm, but also cooling. I search for a pulse, and there's nothing. I reach for his neck, no pulse. I watch his chest, no rise or fall. I check my watch, 16:28, time of death. I write it down and I call hospice. They send out an RN right away. They confirm death. We call F's friend and only known trustee. She's in another state hours away. She asked, though, that we lock up and unplugged appliances. But that whole ordeal, man, was it traumatizing. Anyway, the coroner arrives hours later. They rolled the gurney in, unzipped their body bag. The smell alone coming from them, like death and cheap cleaner. It's a smell that I'll never forget. They walked into F's room and wrapped him into his bed sheets. They lifted him onto the gurney, wiped down his hospital bed. They had the RN and me fill out a form, gave us a card, and just like that, F's body was taken away. Now, F was single, no children, and no known family. It was the end of a family line as far as we could tell. The RN said her goodbyes and walked out. I was left alone in this giant, empty, quiet house. I began locking up the doors and the windows, turning off the lights and unplugging appliances. I walk into F's room and the coroner's smell is still lingering. I sit on the chair, still scooted up to his bedside, and sat there for what felt like hours. I was just thinking about everything that had happened. It was hard. Truth be told, I became depressed for a while afterward, questioning everything that I knew about life. Watching somebody's life slip away like that, while staring them directly in the face, it messes you up a bit. Anyway, I'm past it all now, but the scars, they are definitely still with me. When my baby sister was 3 or so, she suddenly developed an imaginary friend. I was a tween at the time, so I was honestly quite glad that she had something to distract her other than me, considering that I was her built-in babysitter 24/7, and like all cusp of puberty kids, would much prefer watching TV than constantly entertaining a toddler. So naturally, I always encouraged her to play with said friend, and she would do so all hours of the day, giggling away in the living room as I supervised in peace. My parents, too, were a little bit shocked as to how taken my sister had suddenly become with her friend, but my mum would just chat away with her friend as to how funny it was. Both she and I never had imaginary friends, so we both thought that it was just sort of interesting. My dad, however, was more quiet on the subject, but I didn't think anything of it at the time. Anyway, after about a month or so, we're all in the living room and my sister is playing. My mum is on the phone with my grandmother and she suddenly calls over, "What's your friend's name, baby?" And my baby sister replies, "Kevy." My dad immediately shoots up from his seat and he has the weirdest look on his face. He goes to my sister and asks her to say their name again, and after he does, my dad looks straight sick. Now, my dad is a guy who wears his heart on his sleeve and isn't afraid of showing his emotions, but never before had I seen such a look of raw horror on his face. Even now, 10 years later, I've never seen him so scared before. My dad runs to the back of the apartment and I follow out of curiosity, but he just calls for my mum and they shut me out of the room. Eventually, later that day or the next, my dad tells me a story. You see, he had an imaginary friend when he was little named Kevy, and considering that he was the youngest kid in his family by more than 10 years, Kevy was his best friend. He had this imaginary friend for over 5 years or so, and my dad told me that at first Kevy was normal, but as time went on, he got meaner and meaner, and eventually escalated into telling my dad terrible things, and that he should do terrible things. This scared the heck out of my dad, and one day he told Kevy to go away, and he just did. My dad had never told his family about the bad things Kevy had said, and they all assumed that he naturally grew out of it, and never mentioned that he had an imaginary friend to anyone, including my mother and I. He also didn't tell me exactly what Kevy had said to him either, and I didn't push, because he looked really terrified. Anyway, the next week or so, my family saged the house repeatedly, went to churches, and left cleansing tablets in all entrances to the apartment. We told my sister Kevy wasn't allowed to stay anymore, and while she was upset at first, eventually she stopped mentioning him and we never talked about it again. It has been a decade since then, and only recently has this memory come back to me after I've reconnected with my dad, and we were reminiscing about our time in that apartment. I didn't mention this event to him though. My family is very superstitious, and so we completely dropped it, save for continuously saging every couple of months. This had always been a long-buried memory, and honestly, even sharing it out loud like this, it feels sort of wrong. When I was a senior in college a few years ago, I lived in an old house about a 5-minute walk from my campus with 5 of my girlfriends. It was still COVID time, so we spent a lot of time just in the house since we could not really go anywhere. To preface this as well, this house was old, and many of the windows didn't lock. Our landlord sucked, as many colleges ones do, and didn't do anything to fix the issue. But with it being 6 of us and often a boyfriend or 2 sleeping in the house, it felt mostly safe, and many of us would keep our windows open anyway. Our college was in a town just outside of the second most dangerous city in the state, but right around the campus it felt relatively safe. Anyway, when the weather started getting warmer in early spring, we would sit out on the roof to sunbathe, and this roof faced our street. We would access the roof from our roommates, let's call her Mary, her bedroom window on the second floor, since it led straight to the roof. Our street was residential and it didn't get a ton of traffic, but we did have a couple of encounters of younger guys catcalling us as they drove by, but nothing seemed sinister as we were college kids. One night though, late in the semester, Mary went up to her room to call her brother while the rest of us were hanging downstairs. That was when she rushed downstairs and said that she saw a ladder leading up to the roof where we would all sunbathe, and right near her window, which was open. Later we learned she said out loud to her brother what she saw before she came down. When she told us this, my other roommate and her boyfriend ran outside to find a man running away from our house with the ladder, who we assume heard Mary telling her brother she saw the ladder and knew that he was caught. It was dark, so they could not make out anything about him. I immediately texted our landlord asking if he had someone to come by the house to do any work, and he said no. We then called the police who came by. They did some investigating and patrolled our house for a couple of nights, but we never found out who the man was, what his intentions were, or even if, perhaps, he had been there before. This happened when I was 14. I'm 29 as of the time of sharing this, but I remember this story from time to time, meaning like once or twice every few years. It still gets me in a weird mood for some reason too. Anyways, I was walking with one of my friends in the city the other day. I tried holding her hand, but then she thought that I just bumped into her and apologized, so I was able to recover smoothly. Then I saw a group of kids skateboard past us, and lo and behold, that was the thing that sparked this memory, so I figured that I'd write it down. I'm not going to use this kid's real name, so I'll just call him Vinny. I come from a town where the people you went to school with in kindergarten were the same kids that you graduated with. Vinny moved to our school about halfway through the year. When new kids came to our school, everybody would always flock to them. At 14, I was kind of a dork, but also kind of a douche, which made me surprisingly likable to most people for some reason. Vinny would always sit by himself during lunch. Something I found amusing about him was that he would get infuriated if people asked him if he skated. I took that as a challenge to try and get to him, and it worked. The first time he and I had class together, I remember the teacher asking him if he had his books yet. He responded with, "My wife never confirmed my school schedule with the front office." I remember everybody thought that that was funny. You're 14 years old and you have a wife? He was clearly trying to get one over on the teacher. My friends and I were skating after school and we saw Vinny at some point. I remember talking to my friends about what he said, and we all became oddly infatuated with this kid. It took some doing, but after about a week of letting him hang out with us, he became one of the boys. One of my buddies asked if we could go sleep at his house on a Friday night, under the guise that we took turns at staying at each other's houses to skate, play video games, and smoke the green stuff. He looked perturbed, which is something I wish mattered to me back then, but the next day at school, he did say that it was okay after asking his parents. My buddies and I rode our bikes to where he lived, with clothes for the night and our skateboards strapped to our bags. We met his family, who at face value seemed completely fine. But then things got a little bit weird. What I mean is that first, his dad had a huge weapons collection. At the time, I thought that it was pretty awesome, to be honest. He even took us out into a field by a canal to shoot some of his assault rifles. I know, that wasn't cool of him with our parents' consent. Next, we met Vinny's wife. Yeah, the girl was real. She was also 26. And while we did live in the southern US, yeah, I know, even this was taboo. But they would like hold hands and stuff, and at the time we honestly thought that it was pretty cool. It was like dating a senior when you're a freshman, only he was in high school and she paid taxes. Things kind of got to a new level of weird though when Vinny's dad had his arm around Vinny's mum, and his other arm around a girl that couldn't have been terribly older than we were at the time. Apparently, that was also his wife. We then spent about 2 hours praying with the family in the living room. I was raised Catholic, but couldn't determine which religion that they were practicing. Once we finished with that, we went outside to start skateboarding. After a few minutes, his dad came outside and ordered us into the house. Vinny's mother then had us stand in line outside of the bathroom to take a bath. It still skeeves me out that too, but I remember that we weren't allowed to drain the water from the tub. I was the last one to bathe. Also, all of the mirrors in the house were covered with sheets. I have no idea the significance of this. It makes more sense to me to not have mirrors at that point. But we were told to go to bed, even though the sun wasn't even down yet. Vinny went to bed with his wife. The three of us that remained just laid there in one single queen-sized bed and talked about how much fun we weren't having. But the final straw for the night was having to hear Vinny's parents, and maybe the other woman, doing the dirty in the next room. It was almost 11 p.m. when we decided to just get on our bikes and leave. It was dark and we had to ride through some pretty bad neighborhoods, but we made it safe to my buddy's house. Vinny's mother would also later call our parents and leave some pretty cryptic messages which implied trouble. Vinny was pulled from school about a week later, and after that we never saw him again. Now, I don't know what that family was into. Maybe it wasn't as bad as I thought it was as a kid, and I just didn't understand something. All I do know is that we felt incredibly uncomfortable. So uncomfortable that we decided to leave. I have no issues with religion, but if this was part of their practice, I think it's a little bit weird. Out of curiosity, I went to find Vinny on Facebook. All I can confirm is that he, his mother, father, and one of his sisters had died. There were no public records of what happened to them, or if they even died at the same time, or anything. It was a really bizarre experience, and one that I'll never forget. It's something that I come back often to as well, and I think it's worth the tell. I do wish I had a bit more information about the family and what happened to them, but I guess I may just never know. This did not happen recently. I believe that this was when I was maybe 9 to 11 years old. I'm currently 17. So me and my best friend, Katie, were at our elementary school park. We often hung out at this park due to us both living on either side of it, so it was massively convenient. Our city is dangerous as it is known for high rates of robberies, sexual assault, and even human trafficking because of a major highway that runs through our city. Me and her rode our bikes to our favorite picnic table that day, and this table is positioned to where we can clearly see the church across the street. Keep this in mind, and also all street intersections. It's a spot that we can all see with no obstructions. So, we're sitting on the top of the table and simply talking about whatever it is that a kid is talking about, when suddenly I had a weird feeling and I look up. We're facing the church across the street. We are not far from this street, but we're far enough that I question what I saw. This grown man is wrestling with this very small child outside of his car. The back door of his car is open. I'm unsure if the child was walking alone because I was not looking at the time. I also do not know where the car pulled up. In any case, me and Katie are staring, horrified, and we're completely silent and transfixed on what is happening. And suddenly, he picks the child up and throws them into the back of the car. He runs around to the driver's side and speeds off. This happens in the span of like 30 seconds, maybe to a minute. Now, the reason why I'm unsure on what I saw is because I didn't hear the child make any noise, but we were far enough away that we may not have heard anything to begin with. The child was also in a very large neon orange construction jacket, to the point of where it may not have been a child at all. That is how large the jacket was. If it wasn't a child, then why on earth would he throw that person into their car like that and then speed off? What I mean is that when he threw the jacket or the child, he put a lot of effort into it, meaning that it was heavier than a jacket lift. after this, we just stood there silently. We eventually were just like, what the heck was that? We got onto our bikes and sped off to her house, and I think about it regularly. Me and her are still best friends. We haven't brought it up in a very long time. I'm really not sure if she even remembers this, but it always haunts me. Did I witness a child being kidnapped? A parent abusing their kid, or something that looked really sinister but wasn't whatsoever? It's a confusing event, and I've explained it as best as I could, but I don't know. Something tells me that it was a kid being kidnapped. So for context, my family was on holiday in Spain at a resort where you have a sort of small bungalow type building to yourself with different rooms. At this time I was around 8, my sister 10, and my brother around 16. The first thing that happened was when me, my mum, and my sister were sleeping in the same bed due to an arrangement between my parents, and as I was the smallest, I had to lay across the bottom horizontally towards the doorway. I woke up and saw my sister out of bed at one point, which is not unusual in itself. However, she was wearing a very specific onesie that would never be packed for a holiday to Spain, but one that we definitely had at home. Last I remembered, both my sister and I were wearing a vest and pants to bed, so I look over to where she was before, and she's sound asleep, not in the onesie. The next morning I looked and we didn't bring it. A day after that, my sister told me to stop walking around at night as it was creeping her out. I never did this, so I asked her to explain. She said that she saw me creeping around the bed apparently, and when she called out to me, I said shush. Years later, I was telling my mum about it, and she said that she also saw me creeping around my parents' bed, and that my dad started waking up at like 3:15 every night that we were there unprompted. My parents also had the worst fights while we were there. I'm pretty skeptical, but I am wondering, was there something more to this than just illusions? Back in 2001, when I was a senior in high school, I landed my first girlfriend that I was madly in love with. Her family took me in as if I was an extra son to them, so I spent the better part of the following year there after school. My girlfriend and I would get home from school before her parents would get back from work, so we usually sat in the kitchen eating snacks and doing homework. One day, my girlfriend comes down from her bedroom and walks down the stairs normally, but quickly darts down the hall to get back into the kitchen where I'm seating at the table. I ask her why she was acting so weird. She then goes on to tell me that when she had reached the bottom of the stairs, she apparently saw an older man with a great long white beard standing in the study. I go and investigate, and there was nothing there. I then ask if she thought that she saw a ghost, and she doesn't know what she saw, but what she described was what was it. I slightly mocked her that how could this house be haunted? They were the second owners of it after all, and it wasn't even older than 10 years. Previously to the neighborhood being built, it was just woods as well. Anyway, some time passes. At this point, I can't remember how long, but the subject never came up again. That was until I personally saw something. In a similar situation, but roles reversed, I started to walk into the kitchen when, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a man in their dining room, which was off to the right of the kitchen, sitting at the head of the table, wearing what looked like a green velvet suit, or a suit that would not be common in this day and age. I turned my head fully and there was nothing. I tell my girlfriend, but rule out the fact that maybe her sighting had influenced my imagination or something. To note as well, I do believe the possibility to there being more in this life than we can normally perceive, but I am very much skeptical. Fast forward to the summer, and her friend from Brazil is here visiting for their winter break. My girlfriend and myself are in their room being teenagers, and her friend, who was giving us some space, comes bursting through the doors in tears. She is rapidly speaking Portuguese, describing that she was downstairs listening to her CD player when she ran into a man with a long white beard in the study. This more or less convinced me as well. I mean, there was really no reason why my girlfriend would have told her friend, as again the subject never really came up again, and she had no interest in the subject other than her own observation. Fast forward to a few weeks ago, my now ex-girlfriend is back in the United States with her parents. We go out to dinner together and I bring up the subject. Her mum matter-of-factly says, "Yeah, I saw people all the time, usually on the first floor and the basement. I just never said anything to be strong for our kids." Her dad then chimes in about being convinced that they would live in that house when it hadn't been on the market, while searching for a home in the neighborhood, that is. That something told him that they would live there. The next day, the house went onto the market and they moved in shortly afterward. So, we have 3 spectate accounts, I rule myself out, that a harmless ghost that fits a similar description was in that house. To this day, I want to send a letter to the current family asking if they've seen the bearded man, but I don't know. This all happened in Connecticut, by the way, and I would really like to get back there and see it again. So this happened about 7 months ago. I was visiting San Diego for job interviews and staying at my favorite hotel in Sorrento Mesa. For some background, I'm a 40-year-old guy, and a pretty big guy at that. I'm 6'1" and also a former strip club bouncer. So, on my 3rd night, I was pretty late after hanging out with some old friends after my interviews. I got back to the hotel at around 2 in the morning with some Sonny's donuts. After eating a few, drinking a few more, and watching South Park, post-COVID, I decided to have a smoke before going to bed. This made it now around 3 in the morning. Eventually, I go downstairs, walk out the front to the smoking area by the fountain, but there's another couple who are also staying at the hotel already there. I didn't want to impose myself upon them, so I decided to just walk around the outside parts of the hotel while I smoked. I walked around the pool, the barbecue area, the basketball courts, then started back toward the side door. As I did, a black sedan drove up alongside of me and stopped. The window rolled down and a tiny Asian woman asked if I knew how to get out of the parking lot and back to the street. Now, from where we were when she asked me, this was literally in a straight line about 150 feet in front of her, so I honestly thought that she was drunk or just blind. So I politely said, "Yeah, just keep going straight and turn left at the tree." She then asked me if I could get into the car and show her. Now, again, I'm a former strip club bouncer, and this woman looked very much like Walmart Ali Wong. What I mean is that there was absolutely no intimidation factor, but for some reason I instantly felt uneasy. Again, it was literally right in front of her. She could see the road. Also, the windows were all tinted far more than they should have been, and I honestly couldn't tell if somebody else was in the car at this point. I used the smoking as an excuse to not get into the car, but she said that she didn't mind, and gave me a really creepy smile. I politely declined and again pointed out that the road was literally right there, so I'd just be walking back in like 5 seconds anyway. She again asked if I could get in and show her though. This was feeling like a weird kid or sort of ice cream truck situation. I mean, guys, how often do decently looking women just drive up and ask you to get into their car at 3 in the morning in a hotel parking lot, right? How often does anyone ask a big bearded guy to just hop in their car under these circumstances? Nothing about this was right. Again, though, I politely declined as I finished my smoke, and was luckily already standing right at the hotel side door when all of this started, so I just went in. The woman, she drove off as she rolled up the window, right exactly to the exit she had asked me to show her to. So I told the front desk about it, and they said that they would keep an eye on it, but I'm quite sure that nothing was ever done or came of it. It's just one of those things, though, that really makes me wonder, what the heck did she actually want me in the car so badly for? I mean, a pretty man, I am not, so it had to be some kind of scam. I just wonder exactly how much danger I was actually in. My mother worked long shifts at the airport 7 days a week, so me, 12-year-old female, and my younger sister, 10-year-old female, were at home by ourselves majority of the time. For reference too, we lived in a house that had gates on the windows and a gated door that we had to unlock to get to the actual front door. It was late at night at about 10 p.m, and me and my sister were watching TV and preparing for bed. It was around this time that I noticed some sounds coming from our front door and realized that it was someone banging on the gate. I was naive back then and decided to open the door to see who it was. It was a young white man in his late 20s. He had a black and white striped shirt with a jean packet. I asked him what he needed, and he sat there with a blank face and said calmly that he needed me to let him in. I asked him why, and he repeated himself and said, "Let me in, I'm in trouble." He kept looking back over his shoulder, and I felt a bit unnerved and decided not to unlock the gate for him. As soon as I made the decision not to let him in, the police showed up and pulled their guns on this guy. They gave him directions to walk backwards with his hands up, and at that moment, I decided now was the time to close the door. I quickly realized that he may have been running from the police for a crime that he committed. Till this day, I wonder if I would have opened that door and let him in, what might have actually happened. It's something I try not to dwell on too much. My parents got divorced in 1997. I was born in 1990, so I was 7 at the time. They stayed friends, but my mum moved out to my grandparents' old house. My grandparents had quite a lot of money and had recently moved without selling the house, so there was no problem for them to let my mother and us to move to their old home. We ended up living there for about 5 years too. It was me, my mother, and my 2 sisters, who both are a few years older than me, and our dog. What I'm going to tell you is not in chronological order, since I can't remember when everything happened, but I assure you that everything that I share is 100% true. So, the house had 3 floors, ground floor, basement, and upper floor, where me and my sister slept. The basement was the most horrific place in the house. The stairs led from the basement up to the first floor, then to the second floor, sort of like a spiral, and most of the steps would creak and make lots of sound when stepping on them. Several times a week, you would hear footsteps slowly walking from the basement up the stairs, taking a short break at the ground floor, then keep moving to the second floor. Most of the times, the steps would stop at my older sister's room, but it would vary and sometimes stopping outside of my room or my middle sister's room as well. But we all heard it. My mum did not like to talk about it, but my sisters and I, we often talked about it the day after and confirmed hearing it outside whatever room it stopped by. We all hated going down to the basement though. It was a huge basement that you would think children would enjoy playing in, but we just hated it. Our dog also never went down to the basement as well. She seemed to hate it just as much as we did. But all kinds of minor things happened down in that basement. The light would turn off randomly, things would move, and you could often hear sort of stuff moving down there, even though nobody was supposed to be down there. One evening, me and my sisters were playing with walkie-talkies, trying to get to the local police channel, things kids did during the 90s. This time, though, the voice in the walkie-talkie was different and sounded much closer. The voice said all kinds of things. It was speaking directly to my older sister and said that it was going to hurt her. It even spoke her name, but I don't think it ever answered our questions. We got scared and turned off the walkie-talkie. A minute or so later, our dog ran into our room and barked out into nothing. Our dog was large and very protective of us kids, and kept staying in the room barking, which had never really happened before or even afterward. Another time, me and my mum were home, but my sisters and dog were away. I was playing up in my room and my mum was doing whatever mums do, when suddenly I hear really loud footsteps from the basement, even though I was on the second floor in my room, walking, almost running actually, up from the basement, then continuing up the stairs to the second floor. I remember my heart just sort of stopped when listening to the footsteps. My mum never walks that heavy and angry. The footsteps continued though until outside of my room, then stopped, and my door was suddenly slammed really hard. The door closed and I screamed and began to cry. My mum raced up the stairs and tried to open the door, but she couldn't. It was as if the door was locked, though I don't think the door even had a locking mechanism. My mum shouted to me to be calm while she ran down to get the tools to tear the door down. While she was down and 7-8-year-old me was crying, the door just suddenly unlocked itself and opened. Another time when my sisters and my dog were away, there was a storm and for some reason I was deathly afraid of the thunder. I've never been afraid of thunder before or afterward, but this night for whatever reason I was, and in the basement, everything just went absolutely crazy. We heard things thrown down there, glass shattering, which we confirmed in the morning after that, because we saw glass and stuff had been thrown around and shattered everywhere. There were footsteps running up and down the stairs, and me and my mother hugged each other, both scared of what we were hearing. At one time, we were sitting in the living room just being deathly scared. The entrance door flew open, then closed, opened and closed again for like several minutes. We sat there huddled together until eventually the storm left and everything just seemed to stop. Many more minor things happened too, but these are what came to my mind, and it seemed to me that it got worse when my dog was not around for whatever reason, and it was more after my older sister, and even though I told you about the things that happened to me, she has many more experiences than I do. A couple of times she claimed that she even saw an old man watching her sleep, which is really creepy to think about. I haven't really talked to anyone about these experiences, except my mum and sisters, so it's good to get it off my chest. If you have any questions about the house or the experiences, then please do just ask. We lived in the house around 1997 to 2002, and we moved just after that. So my parents went away for the weekend because it was their wedding anniversary. It was just me in the house. I'm 19. I do have a sister who's 17, but she went to stay over at a friend's house that night. So it was just me and the dog, and earlier that day, I had washed my bed sheets and put them in the dryer. A few hours later, when I went back to see if they had dried, I found out that they didn't, and it turns out the dryer had actually broken, which was pretty annoying. I phoned my parents and told them what had happened. I went to look to see if I could find any bed sheets to put on my bed until mine dried, but there really wasn't any, apart from my sister's, who didn't fit my bed. I just decided that I'll sleep in my parents' bed, since it was pretty comfy anyway. Later that night, I'm in bed and my dog is sleeping next to me, and I've got my parents' door slightly open, just in case the dog wants to go out of the room in the night. I'm there just watching YouTube while waiting to feel tired enough to sleep when suddenly I get a very weird feeling come over me. It felt like someone was watching me, and though it was a pretty freaky feeling, I was with my dog, so I wasn't completely scared or alone. I turned the lamp on and tried to fall asleep because my phone was about to die. It's almost 3 in the morning. I think it was like 2:55 when I woke up, and I don't normally wake up randomly at those times, but I look over and my dog is asleep at the bottom of the bed. I look to the door and see what looked like someone kneeling on the floor and kind of holding themselves up by resting on the wall. I was looking for probably a minute to work out what I was actually looking at, and it looked like a person, so I hid under the blanket and stayed under there for a few minutes. Eventually I got the courage to look, and when I did, whatever was there was now gone. This may seem comforting to others, but to me it was way more troubling. I would have preferred if whatever the shadow was had stayed there, because that would have meant that I was probably just seeing something, like a shadow being cast from something in the room or whatever. The fact that it was gone suggests that there was actually something or someone there. I didn't properly go to sleep after that. It was around 5ish in the morning when I did finally fall asleep, and now my sleep schedule is kind of ruined. I'm not really sure what that whole thing was about. I mean, there was nothing by the door that could have made a shape that matches someone kneeling and leaning against the wall like that. I don't think my house is haunted because this is the first time anything has happened, and my parents' house isn't extremely old. It was built in the 80s. This was a few days ago and everybody is now home, thank the Lord. And nothing has happened since, but I would like to know if you guys have any suggestions as to what I should do about this. I'm a 29-year-old woman. I live in an apartment in a sketchier side of my town, so I'm not unaccustomed to strange people pulling up and strange things happening. I've been through a home break-in, so I'm very hyper-vigilant when it comes to keeping myself and my home safe. I also smoke cigarettes. It's a nasty habit, I know, but having cats and not wanting my house to reek like smoke, I'll walk out to my balcony to smoke. That is exactly what I was doing when this happened too. I was sitting on my balcony, smoking and just enjoying my night, when I noticed a car that I'd never seen before pull into the back parking lot of my apartment, right by my balcony. I initially felt a bit off, but I didn't want to come off as being the paranoid neighbor, so I keep sitting and smoking my cigarette. Then I hear footsteps making a beeline through my backyard. There's a large and burly man that I'd never seen before walking briskly through my backyard. Again, I still don't try to make much of it because, well, they might be there for my neighbor or something. My anxiety is definitely on alert, but not in panic mode is what I'm getting at. Until I realize that he's going straight for my portion of the backyard. He then does something that is still freaking me out as I share this. He stops right in my backyard, looks up at me on my balcony, not saying a word. I'm sort of panicking now. I audibly say, heck no, spring up, slam and lock my balcony door, run to my upstairs bathroom, and dial 911. I listened to every sound from downstairs while I stood panicking in my bathroom, and truthfully, it sounded like someone was messing with my back door at this point. I don't know for sure because I was in hypervigilant mode. I do know, though, that he was in my backyard for a few minutes because I was in my bathroom for several minutes until I decided to peek out of my balcony window. I saw him walking to his car and getting in, which also tells me that I don't think that he was there to rob me, but perhaps something more sinister. Luckily, he was lazy because, again, I live on the cheaper side of town, so you can imagine the quality of my doors and locks. I'm really hoping that it was just some guy who was drunk or high and had the wrong house or whatever, but my gut is telling me otherwise. Regardless, I just hope that this doesn't happen again. Last night, and I'm a 22-year-old female, and my husband, 25-year-old male, woke me up at around 11:50 to tell me that someone has been knocking on our door and ringing our apartment doorbell for about 10 minutes on and off. He woke me so that I could possibly ID the person. Once I looked out of our upstairs apartment window, I saw the man walking to his car in our apartment parking lot. It's across the street from our unit. He was wearing blue jeans and a grey t-shirt. He was a medium build, I suppose. Possibly 30 years old, a blonde man. He wasn't covering his face or anything too, but the thing is that he was carrying what looked like resistance bands or a rope or something. He sat in his car for about 3 minutes while I was on the phone with dispatch. Then he came back to our door and knocked hard for another few minutes. Dispatch advised me that police were on their way and they hung up. It was at this point that I started videoing the vehicle. I read out the tag number and make and model and just watched as he put the car in park and reverse over and over again. Out of seemingly nowhere too, he backed out of the parking lot and started rushing away, but not before the officer arrived and pulled him over. My downstairs neighbor knocked on my door and told me that he had been peering into her little children's window and was pounding on her door as well. She said that her husband had left only 1 minute before he started knocking at her door. She said that he saw her children through the window and that's why he seemed to continue knocking. Our doors are right next to one another, so he probably didn't know what door he wanted opened. He was watching us as well through our upstairs windows, so I turned all the lights out and shut the blinds while I called dispatch. The police never contacted us for a statement. I've reached out to dispatch about an update and I'm waiting to see if any action was taken. We're keeping our eyes peeled to see if he's been following us or anything. I'm replacing my porch light bulbs with motion detectors and putting bars in our windows and door tracks and stuff. My neighbor and our families are pretty panicked, to say the least, because he was outside for about 25 to 30 minutes and that shows a lot of determination to get in, right? I'm still waiting on a call from the responding officer. I have his badge number and name, so if they don't reach out to me today or tonight, he might work third shift apparently. I'll call the substation. If they didn't do anything, I'll go ahead and make a suspicious persons case for the paper trail. We've had no odd encounters any other night. However, while I was looking at the video that I took, I remembered that car. I was walking my dog at 8 PM about a week ago for him to go pee, and this car was driving really slow through the parking lot and parked a few spots down from where I was letting my dog sniff. They just seemed to sit there with the car running, and when I tell you my ears started ringing and I got an awful feeling, I'm not joking. In fact, it got so bad that I just turned around and went home. I didn't even give my dog a chance to pee and I shut every door and window. I think that this man has been staking out our apartment building for some time now, me and my neighbors, and I think that he wanted to get in where those children are. So I was sat in my friend's bedroom in the new house his family had just built, on the side of the old barn. We had the windows open and a soft breeze and the distant sounds of people in the park were drifting through. We were watching movies, eating snacks, having a lazy summer holiday afternoon. There was nothing eerie or scary about any of it, no scary films, no talking of anything of the sort. But in between films, my friend got up to replenish the snacks while I was changing the disc. He called my name from the door and I was turning to answer when I felt the distinct, unmistakable sensation of like an ice-cold hand tightening on my neck. I dropped the DVD case as my hands instinctively flew up to my throat to pull his hand away, but of course, my friend wasn't there. In fact, nobody was there. But this hand, it had completely restricted my breathing and I couldn't take a breath. My friend ran over in a panic and led me to the sofa to sit down while I was gasping for air, utterly terrified. He kept saying, just breathe, while he fumbled for his phone and started dialing 999, which is like our 911 here in England. Then, on and off with the just breathes, I was suddenly able to take a breath. It probably lasted less than a minute, but man, I just broke down shaking and crying. I still have no idea what that was, but it felt like someone had grabbed my throat and was just strangling me. To this day, it's the only unexplainable thing that's ever really happened to me as well. I've always been enthralled by ghost stories and the tales of the unexplained, but this is my only real-life experience that I know of. I have no medical conditions or allergies or anything like that. Nothing has developed in the 2 decades since this happened either. Nothing that could really explain what caused this freak incident. and when I asked my friend about it years later, he said it looked like a ghost walked through me or something. Not that he saw a ghost, but the terror on my face and how I turned sheet white and just froze like that. He said that it's something that will live with him forever. So this happened years ago when I just moved to a new town for school. I lived with my second aunt for the first 2 months, but we had totally different lifestyles, and I decided that it would be better if I just move out. I didn't have a lot of money, so I was initially willing to share rent with somebody. Fast forward a week and still nothing. One day I had 2 appointments in the same area at 7 and 8 p.m, the other end of town, but the district was quite decent and not cheap. Mum was against me going there alone and so late, but I just didn't really have a choice. I arrived at the metro station in advance because I had to walk 15 minutes from there to get to the first apartment complex. The road to the complex was dark, surrounded by not-so-nice-looking buildings and almost deserted. Definitely not what I expected from the area at all. Out of nowhere, though, a guy approached me. He was about my age, tall, wore glasses, and had a kind of nerdy and intelligent look to him, I guess. Also out of nowhere, he stated that I must be a domestic violence victim and need help. I was so taken aback that I didn't even know what to say to that. He said that he could help. He has all the resources and I shouldn't be afraid to talk to him. I finally gained back the ability to speak and firmly told him that I'm not experiencing any DV and I don't need any help. He continued, "You shouldn't be afraid of your husband. There are shelters for women that you can temporarily stay in. I'm a psychologist and I help women like you. Does he beat you? Assault you verbally? You don't have to put up with that, you know. One word and I get social workers involved and you'll never see him again." I was shocked that anybody could assume that I was married because at the time I never even had a boyfriend. It lasted for about 5 to 7 minutes. I kept on walking. He kept on talking. Doesn't matter how many times I told him that I don't need any help. He encouraged me to open up and not to feel afraid to tell that I wanted to be rescued from my abusive husband. And there was just no way to tell him that I didn't even have a husband. He seemed to be convinced that I was a DV victim. I even considered yelling at him, but he was just so polite, well articulated, and honestly, listening to him, I could believe that he was working with DV victims, because, a weird coincidence, but that's exactly what my mum's job is, and I'm quite familiar with the terms and techniques that he was using. Honestly, he didn't seem intimidating, and I wasn't scared by his presence or weird assumptions. Just it was so bizarre and out of place that I merely wanted him to leave me alone and wondered if he was going to walk me all the way to the apartment complex. And if so, what happens if he mistakes my potential landlord that was already waiting for me at the porch for my abusive husband? Thankfully, though, he left earlier. He tried to give me his business card as a last attempt to save me. I firmly denied again, and finally he walked away. I got to the apartment. Long story short, didn't like it. Was too expensive, not really worth the price, plus the weird guy that most likely lived nearby and all that. But the second appointment was 20 minutes from there, and I liked the neighborhood much more. Well lit, felt safer, lots of shops, people walking by. I got to the building 30 minutes early and decided to walk around and check out the porch that I have to wait on for the girl that I need to talk to. Then, the second encounter happened. 2 people, a guy and a girl, exited the porch. I meet the guy's eyes for a brief moment and he stops completely, looking at me in some kind of awe, or I don't know how to describe it, to be honest. I thought maybe he recognized me from somewhere at first, but it seemed unlikely. I didn't know anyone in this city except for my aunt and classmates, and he wasn't any of them. I'd never met him before, in fact. So I made sure it was the porch that I needed, texted the girl who was supposed to show me her apartment, and she replied back that she was going to be late. Great, I thought. I started walking around the courtyard back and forth, still feeling the guy's eyes on me. He was standing nearby talking to the girl that he exited the porch with. His head slightly moved as I moved across the courtyard. Finally, I got tired of it and I decided to check if he's really following me everywhere that I go. I chose a moment when he wasn't looking at me and made a run, getting behind the building and hid in a bush. And 1 minute later, I see him. He gets behind the building too, but isn't able to find me. Then he literally stands on his tiptoes, slowly moving his head to the right, to the left, trying to spot me, it seems. His lips are moving too, and I hear, "Where is she?" I felt goosebumps all around my body. He left. I still stayed and waited for the girl to come, because I was afraid that she'd give me a bad review on a site that we were using, but even after we finally met, she said that she forgot the keys and we need to wait for the other flatmate. We sat on a bench, chit-chatting for another 30 minutes, and only then walked to the building. And there was the guy with this girl again, still standing. I saw his eyes practically burning a hole in me this time, and he smiled, or rather grinned widely, and with some kind of evil pleasure almost. I still remember his grin because I've never seen anything like that. We walked past him, and my potential flatmate showed me the apartment, although at that moment I already knew that we weren't going to live together, which was a pity because I really liked the place, but oh well. That guy, with him being there on the same porch, chances are that he lived there too. Honestly, I don't remember what happened in the apartment because it was years ago. Something tells me I asked the girls that lived there about this guy, but I don't think that their reply was of significance. They either brushed it off and I decided not to push it, or I never asked them in the first place. I also don't remember if I saw him when I was exiting the building, but I know for a fact that nobody followed me to the metro station, and I've never seen this guy again. I don't know what his deal was, and I'm not sure if I want to. I also never returned to that cursed area as of now, but it was weird. 2 really eerie and creepy encounters in one night. I don't know if I was being set up, or if something else was going on, or if it was just a really strange coincidence, but something tells me that there was a plan there that day, that multiple people may have been involved, and that somehow my ability to get away from these people at just the right time may have saved me from something that day. What that is, I still don't know. This experience took place in the spring of '77 when I was 5 years old. My mother had a friend named Nikki who had invited us to spend the weekend at her house. Vicky's house was not some rundown, obviously haunted home that you would expect for a story like this. It was actually a newer 2-story build that was less than 10 years old. While the house did not give off any weird vibes, I remember that Vicky wasn't exactly the nicest woman either, and always seemed to be giving my sister and I trouble, like she was thinking we were going to damage something by being kids. Anyway, in Vicky's basement she had one of those hanging half-basket wicker chairs that were popular in the 70s. I was down in the basement sitting on this chair, being very careful as I didn't want to give Vicky another reason to tell me off, when suddenly the chain or the rope that fastened the chair to the ceiling broke and it fell forward on the open side, trapping me inside of it like a cage. At the same time that I fell to the floor, Vicky's stereo suddenly turned on by itself and started playing very loud music. I was utterly terrified and screamed for my mother. My mother and Vicky came rushing down the stairs, and my mum got me out from under the chair while Vicky shut the stereo off. Vicky then started laying into me for breaking the chair and playing with the stereo, but my mum told her to shut it. We left shortly afterwards when I had calmed down too. But to this day, I can vividly remember the feeling of terror as that chair fell on top of me and the stereo just came on loudly like that. When I brought it up to my mum years later, she remembered the incident and took us home because she didn't think it was possible for me to turn on the stereo, and managed to break the chair in the time that it took between the stereo coming on and me screaming for her. It was basically instantaneous, is what she said. She thought Vicky was acting terribly the entire time, and yelling at me for the incident was the last straw, and we never went back to Vicky's again after that. And I can't say that I'm at all heartbroken about it either. There was something weird about that house, and I don't know, I just felt like something was in it and it didn't like me for whatever reason, and it wasn't just Vicky. When I was 9 years old, 2 of my sisters and I were nearly kidnapped. We were visiting a paternal uncle in a small rural town in the US, My sisters, aged 8 and 6, and we had walked a block or two to an elementary school to play in the playground. To give some context too, this was around 1979, in summer, and the playground was near the street and a parking lot for the school. So, a man drove into the parking lot, got out of his car and came up to us. I was immediately leery. He started talking to us. As far as I recall, we were never taught stranger danger prior to this. In fact, we were told to always be polite to strangers. And this man, he kept trying to convince at least one, if not all three of us to leave with him. It was very clear with him that this was not happening. I was trying to find an excuse for us to head home as well. He offered something to eat. I responded that my mum was making lunch. I remember him talking about either finding or playing with this dog or something. While he talked to us, I memorized every detail that I could. I also kept telling my sisters we needed to go. They wanted to play, but finally the fire department bell went off. They sounded it at noon every day, so I told my sisters Mum was expecting us at home at noon for lunch. I took them both by the hand and we ran home. Before we went even a few steps though, the man called, "If you're hungry, I can show you my hot dog." And I immediately responded, "That's okay, I think my mum is making hot dogs for lunch." I remember thinking, chew on that, but when we got to my uncle's house, my mum was in the kitchen making lunch. Ironically, she was making us hot dogs too. I tried to tell our mum about what happened and she just wasn't listening. I finally said, "Mum, the man wanted to show us his hot dog." That was when she started to listen to me. I told her everything and she called for my dad and my uncle. I was asked to retell the story, and my father then called the cops. The police officers sat us all down, my uncle, parents, and all three of us girls. I told the story again. My sisters and I were asked some questions. It seemed like the two of them hadn't seen the danger. The police officers then asked me to describe the man and his car, and I was able to do so in great detail. The officers were actually surprised at how much detail I gave them. The officers told us that they would try to find him, but pointed out that there was a large road that passed by this little town only a few blocks further down the road. My parents hadn't considered that when allowing us to play there. We came into town from another direction when visiting. We never heard from the police about this event, and we were never allowed to go to the school playground on our own, ever again. When I was in high school, I lived in an apartment complex in Calabasas, California. It's where all the kids lived that weren't filthy rich, that went to Calabasas High School or Agora High School. I became friends with most of the kids in that complex too. We would play basketball some days and on the weekends break into empty apartments and throw parties. One particular party that I was hanging out with a group I didn't know well. It was 5 other guys and 1 girl. We were smoking, drinking, and I saw the guys go into another room while the girl was standing in the kitchen drinking a beer. I get up to use the bathroom and I overhear the guys say, "We're going to get this girl." Another guy says, "We're going to run a train on her." Now, in high school, I was already a pretty big kid, 6'3" and 250 pounds. When I heard the things that they were planning on doing to her, I walked up to them and said, "You guys aren't going to do a thing like that while I'm around." They tried to convince me to join in. It would be fun, they said, and she might get into it. I left the room and told the girl and said that she should probably head home, the party's over. She left and I left shortly after too. I never did have anything else to do with those guys after that. But the kicker is that the boy that said let's run a train on her, I later found out from a mutual friend, had actually murdered his girlfriend in college and was killed in a police chase crashing his car in the median. The world is a scary place, especially for women sometimes, and I think about this even more now that I have my own daughter. So my father and uncle have a story of living as outsiders or non-natives, Caucasian, young people on the reservation. Their tale was of experiencing a skinwalker. My grandma taught school on the reservation and they lived well off compared to the natives living there. From what I know, there's a lot of lore surrounding the Navajo Nation. Non-natives, primarily older generations, keeping their experiences and stories left unspoken, especially to those not from the culture. Forgive me too if I'm mistaken in any of this, the culture, ideology, practices, or any other part. I'm just trying to tell the story that my family has only spoken to me in whispers about. My grandmother, father, and uncle lived there for a few years, and their experience was much different than the Navajo people who lived there for generations upon generations. And I just want to tell their story and get insight as to anyone else who has lived in that community and any other story some people might be willing to share. So, my father and uncle are about 2 years apart in age. They lived in Navajo Mountain in the 1980s. My dad was 10 to 12 and my uncle younger, and as it goes, they were always outside riding bikes with their friends, natives of the reservation. My grandma was recovering from an abusive relationship with their father and wasn't too concerned with their whereabouts, being it was a small community. There wasn't much trouble around, nor would they know what real trouble was at that age. Trouble wasn't the issue to young white boys on a reservation then, but Huatara was. It was a typical night, without any parental supervision. The night was colder than usual, and the night sky was blacker than you could imagine. In such a desolate place, the stars in the sky would light the night, but this night was as if the earth had moved to a different dimension, an abyss even. The boys raced each other as they did every night, until they were compelled to force their brakes in unison. They simultaneously looked up. Each boy's face melted from carefree innocent and adolescent to unadulterated horror. The boys stood motionless, grasping their bikes with every nerve, muscle, and strength in their body on the dirt road, because to the right of them was a mesa, one that they rode by every day. The mesa that paralleled from my family's home. The mesa that they could see through my father and uncle's bedroom every night. This mesa would become fear and nightmare to them from this night forward, because at the top of the mesa was a roaring fire, taller than any bonfire that someone could assemble, bigger than a group of people could assemble. It raged and was unbelievable. It was almost as tall as the mesa itself. More unbelievable, though, was the pitch-black figure seen cavorting around the bonfire. The native boys with my father and uncle informed them that this was not a typical Navajo dance or ritual either. Pits began to form in their stomachs. Friends of my father and uncle turned back around without a word and bolted back to their homes. My father and uncle threw their bikes to the ground and ran across the unpaved road into their home. The two came back in a panic, relaying what they'd seen to my grandmother, but she was unconcerned for the most part. It was apparently a legend of the natives, she told them, and shooed them away. They laid awake all night in their shared room that night, not saying a word to one another. They forced their curtains to close as much as they could, too scared to look out the window and see what they shouldn't have to begin with. Neither could shake the images burnt into their memory, but the sun managed to rise and peek through into their entire room eventually. A sense of release washed over them as the darkness had faded. The boys left their beds and they traveled to the kitchen to try a second time to tell the grandmother what they saw that night. They tried to get a handle on what they saw, but it was as if they couldn't explain it. Again, my grandmother brushed them off, but with the coffee and newspaper more important than their story, she told them to climb the mesa to investigate. So the boys wrangled their friends who shared the experience with them that night prior as they passed on their bikes. The friends stayed on the dirt road, looking up at the mesa as my father and uncle climbed up to see any evidence of the hell-burning fire they witnessed together. The mesa wasn't much taller than an average one-story house, though, so the brothers took less than 2 minutes to climb to the top where the nightmare took place. When they got to the top, they were hysterical and also relieved. There was no indication a bonfire of that enormity, or even a fire at all, had taken place on the mesa they had already seen in the night earlier. They climbed down and told the message to the friends who had also been a part of the shocking scene. The native friends looked at them in shock, but neither said a word to them. They immediately turned their bikes around and proceeded home, and it was never talked about again despite my father and brother asking about it. My grandmother and everybody else in the community just refused to talk about it again. My father is a skeptic. He doesn't believe in anything paranormal, like aliens, ghosts, mermaids, I mean, you name it, but whenever I ask about the skinwalker he saw, he always turns pale and white. He gets quiet, jumpy and curt. I had to plead to get the full story out of him, in fact, and I could see goosebumps and every hair standing up on his arms when he shared this experience. My grandma took me to Navajo Mountain in 2019 to show me her history and see how Navajo natives still live on this reservation today. According to her, not much has changed since living there in the 80s too. I hiked and explored what I could of the reservation, as to not invade or violate any of the Navajo reservation and its beauty. However, I did feel a change in mood when I visited. My existence felt, heavy, as if I wasn't supposed to be there, or as if I was invading on territory that wasn't meant for me. Not caused by any of the community there or anything, but just by my presence being on the land or something. I will never forget my experience visiting and all that I learned about the reservation life. I climbed the mesa where the skinwalker my dad and uncle had seen its ritual, and I felt pretty normal until I got to the top and stood in the middle. I know it sounds weird, but I felt a darkness creep into me as I stood there, and ever since then, I've never been the same. So my cat likes to go outside every day in the morning. He follows us to the door, takes the elevator down with us, and then goes about his day outside until we bring him back home again in the evening. Now, my cat isn't the most punctual guy, so it's pretty common for him to stay much later in the neighborhood, sometimes well into the night for like several days even, or he gets bored and doesn't play for more than 2 hours and wants to get back inside. The problem is that we're not home, so he just has to wait. My family and I lived in an apartment on the first floor, so my cat's solution is to sit under one of the balconies and meow at the top of his lungs to get our attention. When we're home, it works perfectly fine, but when we're not, it's a lot less effective. So our solution was to gently ask our neighbors that have the key to our apartment to bring him up so he doesn't have to wait outside all day. Those that don't have the key sometimes let him inside the building so he's not literally outside, for example when it's raining. Our apartment is a bit special though because it's bigger than the others, so to get inside there are 2 ways when you get into the main hall. One takes the stairs to the left and open the door that has 2 locks. The second uses the elevator with the special key that goes directly inside of our apartment, and the door only has 1 lock. The cat is actually used to the second option, and me too because we're both lazy. But when the neighbors that don't have the key let him inside the building, he goes up the stairs and waits. And since I usually use the elevator from the parking 2 floors below, that means that I don't really see him waiting in the hall, and he meows outside the door to get me to open it up for him, or my dad, or my mum. But all around we have our habits with my parents and neighbors, and it works fairly well. So, now that you know how everything goes with the little guy, now we get to the good part. My parents like the outdoors very much, so I'm usually left alone in the weekends. But generally, it means just taking care of chores and inviting my friends over so that we can have the apartment to ourselves, which is pretty nice. This time I was alone. It was late, 11 p.m.-ish, and I was just chilling in the living room before hearing meowing over the sound of the TV. Someone must have let my cat in the building, and he's waiting outside the door like usual. I took my keys and started opening the first lock. I don't know about other pet owners, but I know my cat meows by heart pretty much. It's kind of a rising meow that's very high-pitched and very cute, and that also has a specific sort of rhythm to it because I've been hearing it nearly every day for like 5 years. And because of this, I stopped. You see, the noise isn't what it usually is. It's like too deep and just off a bit. But this isn't my cat outside my door, and he's the only cat around that knows that he has to wait by the door and scream to be let inside. By that point, I had stopped halfway through opening the door and waited to hear him again and noticed scratching this time. But my cat never scratches the door. At that point, I'm a bit weirded out by the situation, but the meowing is getting super loud and I didn't want the neighbors to be woken up, so I continued with my key, but suddenly I heard another noise that really freaked me out. It was a cough. For the record too, I'm not a very cautious person, and in my whole 21 years of living in this apartment, I must have looked in the peephole a total of maybe, 5 times, but a small part of my brain told me to do it, and thank God that I did it that night. So I let go of my keys and put my eye against the door, and I saw it. A man standing there, meowing at my front door. To say that I was terrified is really an understatement, but my heart pretty much stopped. I just stood there petrified for what felt like an hour. I don't really know how long it took for me to move again, but eventually my body just took over, I guess. And I did what you'd expect. I ran for my phone, stood in the corner of the living room and called the police. By the time that they got there was nobody in the front door. I can't even remember when the meowing stopped, to be honest, and they just took my testimony before telling me to be cautious and left. To this day, I still don't know what that meowing guy wanted. I'm not sure I want to know anyway, but I also don't know how he got inside the building in the first place, since you need a key to access it, and how he knows that I would open the door if he imitated my cat in front of it. Well, at least I'll be careful from now on, I suppose, and that's good, but and my cat eventually came back in since then, and he's sleeping in my bed as I'm sharing this, so there's that, I guess. So I dated someone who owned a cadaver dog. Basically, they can find dead bodies. It was a new term to me when I met them too. But anyways, they explained that they worked with rescue teams. We live in wilderness country. The dog's job was to sniff out bodies for people who might have gotten lost and died, buried under avalanches, etc. After 5 months of dating too, my now ex asked if I could house or dog sit. I was more than happy to because it was a great dog. I would be dog sitting for 2 weeks while they visited family. I was warned that it has happened on hikes before, that the dog picks up the scent of a corpse and gave me the steps to follow if it does happen. And the first couple of days were pretty uneventful. But then one day, the dog is dragging me down this trail, and I'm panicking because I was like, oh no, I'm going to see a dead body, aren't I? But the dog stops at this very stern woman, just sort of sauntering along. He keeps looking back and forth between me and the woman. She gives me a quick, your dog isn't well trained, and keeps going. I practically had to drag this dog away to get it away from this woman. And it happens with this same woman a few more times, so I call the owner to bring it up. I describe the woman, and my ex is so shocked and confused by this, not familiar with this woman at all. But fast forward to my last night of dog sitting. I was going to bed, and I had this horrific nightmare of being held down in the bed by this woman. I hear a bark, and I wake up, and the dog is standing next to me on the bed. It's also in its alert position, staring at the bed. And after that, I didn't get any sleep. And I also never got any answers.